Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Undying Fire, Truth and Lies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 13, Reunion. Well, June said brusquely. Where is the item with Prince Pouty's scent? Iroh reached inside his tunic and brought out a small case made of metal. He released the latch, brushing aside the folded portrait of Lu Ten that was nestled within, and pulled out a single lock of black hair. Will this work? June wordlessly took the lock of hair from him and held it up to Nilla's nose. The Shershu sniffed at the strands, then started sniffing even more frantically at the air, moving in different directions as it tried to pick out traces of Zuko's scent and the path for them to follow. It seemed to take much longer than when the Shershu had been tracking the waterbender girl. Iroh started to feel worried. What if his plan didn't work? Suddenly, Nilla made a keening sound and strained towards the plains in the distance, as if she were barely resisting the urge to bolt and leave her master behind. She's got the scent, June observed, handing him back the lock of hair. It's faint, but she's definitely found him. Come on. Iroh didn't need telling twice and clambered up behind June on the Shershu. They were off with a flick of a whip, darting past open-mouthed townsfolk and pounding along the road in a blur of dust. A heavy weight seemed to lift from Iroh's shoulders. It seemed the spirit of luck was on his side. Impulse had made him cut that lock of hair the night the ship had exploded and Iroh had found his nephew struggling for life. Now, he could only be grateful that he had listened to that need to carry a reminder of Zuko close to his heart. Hold on, nephew, he prayed. Just hold on. I'm on my way. Oh. Night had fallen. Zuko knelt beside a shrub, holding a clump of white fur in his hand while the other cradled a ball of fire for light. The soft glow of the flames distorted the paint on his mask, giving him a ghoulish appearance. His ostrich horse made a nervous sound. He cast it an impatient glance. What's the matter with you? The ostrich horse made another muffled squawk and scratched at the earth with its talons, clearly uneasy. Zuko frowned and stood up, extinguishing his flames so that only the moon lit the forest path. His senses, normally so alert, suddenly prickled to life. Something was out there. Quietly, he moved to the ostrich horse and stroked its muzzle in a soothing caress, calming it so that it would not make a sound. Once he was satisfied, he unsheathed his blades and started heading deeper into the forest, letting his instincts guide him rather than his eyes. As the blue spirit, he had learned to see with his ears, his nose, even the quickening beat of his heart. He surrendered himself to his senses and slowly, bit by bit, a map of the forest began to form in his mind. A snap of a branch, a rustle of leaves. He spun around on Panther Fox's feet and moved stealthily towards the noise. I can't believe I'm spending my night looking for bits of white fur, a gruff voice said. It's nearly midnight, for spirit's sake. We should be sleeping right now. Nothing is more important than capturing the Avatar, a second male responded. Now shut up and keep looking. What, you're really taking this mission to heart? It's not about what I think, it's about what the princess thinks, and she'll have both our heads if we don't do our job properly. Now keep searching. Zuko tightened his grip on the clump of fur balled in his fist. His sister must be closer than he'd thought if her soldiers were stationed in the area. A part of him was frustrated. He had not wanted to follow the Avatar. In fact, as soon as he had recognized the fur, he had decided to head in the opposite direction, because he could still see that stupid kid's smile when he closed his eyes, and he could still hear the pain in the Avatar's voice, begging Zuko not to hate him. Confusion and more confusion, that was all the Avatar had ever brought him, and right now Zuko wanted none of it. He didn't want to see the Avatar's face again. But Azula was hunting Aang, and Zuko could not, would not, forgive Azula for trying to kill him. He needed to know. He needed to know why she had deemed him as worthless, why she thought she could just dispose of him at will, as if he were not her brother but a pawn that had lost its use. Mostly, he just wanted to make her suffer. Echoes of feelings and images still swirled inside him like a storm, tangling and crashing and chipping away at his heart. The cold truth was that regaining his identity hadn't made him feel whole. He just felt poisoned, like little bits of him had been eaten away and all he was left with was this consuming rage. This need to wound as he had been wounded. Zuko gritted his teeth and headed back towards his ostrich horse. It would be stupid to attack her now. He was just one bender and she had a whole troop of soldiers at her command. He would be overwhelmed in seconds. No, he needed to be smart about this and come up with a plan. Angela was cunning and precise, always one step ahead of her prey. One sniff of his presence and he would lose his chance to bring her down. But then right now he wasn't her target. Zuko paused and stared at the clump of fur in his hand. It would be risky. So many things could go wrong if he made even one miscalculation, but what choice did he have? He was a luckless, banished prince who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Besides, if there was one thing he was good at, it was tracking without being seen until he wanted to make his presence known. He just had to wait until Angela isolated herself from the others, and he knew she would. There was no way she would let anyone else bring down the Avatar. She would want that glory for herself, her one and only weakness. Zuko's eyes narrowed behind the slits of his mask. That would be his chance to strike. He got on the ostrich horse and slinked off into the night, blending into the darkness as if he were made of nothing but shadow. Not far from him, a huge tank rumbled to life and charged towards the mountains with demon-like speed. The clumps of white fur had been found and the hunt started anew. Oh! That thing is back! Topha's cry had them all sitting up with a snap, glancing blearily around the clearing. Katara clutched her waterskin, her mouth dry and her heart pounding. She had still been brooding over Aang's confession when Sokka had come to find her, telling her that they needed to go because something big was heading their way. It was the last thing she had wanted to do at the time, for she had no desire to be near Aang, but she had seen the urgency in her brother's eyes and had put aside her bitterness for the sake of self-preservation. Hours had passed since that conversation and the weird tank thing was still chasing them. By the time they learned that their pursuers were the three dangerous ladies from Omashu, Katara was fuming and exhausted. She gritted her teeth as she picked herself up from the ground, bruised after Appa had passed out on them midair. "This is all your fault," she snapped, glaring at Aang. "My fault," he said in surprise. "You were the one who insisted on going into Omashu to find King Bumi, even though we told you it was dangerous." Her eyes hardened. "Those girls wouldn't be chasing us right now if you had just listened." Whoa. Sokka put a hand on her shoulder. "Calm down, sis. You know that's not fair on Aang. He didn't know this would happen. Besides, we were able to help the residents escape from the control of the Fire Nation. That has to be a good thing, right?" She bit her lip and looked the other way, frustrated and feeling the mad urge to scream. Maybe Sokka was right. Maybe she was being too hard on Aang, but it just made her so angry. He had lied to her. He had lied to her about so much, and then there were all the times he had got them into dangerous situations with his reckless, carefree behavior. It was true that in her heart she knew that Aang had never meant for anyone to get hurt, but then that was the problem. He didn't think. He didn't listen. He just acted and they were the ones who always got burned for it. Sometimes literally. "Katara." Aang's small voice pierced her heart. She closed her eyes, refusing to look at the wounded expression she knew she would see on his face, just like a kicked polar bear dog puppy. "I'm sorry," he continued, still in that subdued voice. I didn't know those girls would chase us this far. It shouldn't have come as too much of a surprise," Katara said waspishly, "considering their ringleader is Zuko's sister. That whole family seems determined to capture you." Aang flinched. Good. So he should feel bad. Yet even as the thought popped into her mind, another prodded at her conscience, twisting her insides with guilt for making him look so downcast. It wasn't fair that she was taking her frustration out on Aang. An unbiased part of her knew that, but the words kept spilling from her mouth and that horrible, waspish tone would not leave her voice. "Why don't you go befriend the princess as well?" she suggested, and gave a cold laugh. "That's what you do, right? Befriend the people who want to hurt you and lie to those who actually care about you." Aang opened and closed his mouth a few times, but no words came out. Instead, he just stared hard at the ground, his hands trembling. "Oh, put a rock in it, Sugar Queen," Toph said bluntly. "He doesn't need a lecture from you, and from what I've seen you're not so perfect yourself." Katara turned on Toph, her eyes flashing. "What would you know? You've barely been with us for 2 days, and if anyone here has no right to judge, it's you. This whole night you haven't lifted a finger to help us set up camp or help with any of the chores. You're just a selfish little brat. Topha's milky green eyes narrowed. Hey, I carry my own weight, she retorted, thumping a hand against her chest. And if we're to talk of brats, I'm looking at one right now. Katara took a step forward. Why you? Bring it on. Toph matched her step for step so that the two girls were inches apart. Sokka's hands suddenly came up between them, breaking the standoff. Ladies, let's just calm down, okay? I'm perfectly calm. Katara screeched. But then that wasn't true. She was on edge and her insides were bubbling with frustration. She didn't know what was wrong with her. Why was she being so horrible? Why couldn't she just stop the awful words from spilling out of her mouth? Aang still looked like he had been kicked in the chest, and now Toph and Sokka were turning against her. Suddenly, all the aggressiveness seemed to vanish from her body, leaving her drained and riddled with guilt. Just leave me alone, she yelled, and ran off in the opposite direction. Katara, wait. She could hear her brother calling, but she just quickened her pace. She couldn't face them right now. Not like this. Not when she felt so guilty and bitter and confused. So instead she kept running until the sun had established itself in the sky and she could hear the birds calling to each other. It wasn't until much later that she realized she was lost and had no idea how to get back to the camp. Katara cursed under her breath and sat down on the ground, hugging her knees to her chest. She felt miserable and alone, and she knew she only had herself to blame. After all, no one had told her to run away or say those horrible things to her friends. Her bottom lip trembled and a few tears splashed her cheeks, but she didn't bother to wipe them away. I'm such an idiot, she muttered. Because the problem was not that Aang had lied or that Toph wasn't helping out with the chores. It was her. She didn't know how to forgive. She wished that she knew how to forget. If she could just be the better person, she wouldn't have to feel so wretched. She wouldn't have to feel so betrayed by a truth that was never hers to dictate, as if Aang's confession was a poisoned dart designed specifically to hurt her. The blue spirit was actually Zuko. The masked boy she had thought her friend was a firebender. Just like that man. Her fingers closed around the blue pendant that hung from her throat. She could feel the grooves of the carved water tribe patterns pressing into her palm, whispering of a woman with dark hair and blue eyes, of snow and ash and blood splattered on a hut floor. A faint tremor traveled down Katara's spine and more tears slipped free. Somehow, it always came back to her mother. Mom, I'm scared. Go find your dad, sweetie. I'll handle this. Katara squeezed her eyes shut and tried to block everything out: the memories, the confusion, the bitterness. She didn't know how long she sat like that, huddled on the ground like a child. Then a shadow passed over her, shifting the light that danced in blurry shades of orange behind her closed eyelids. She opened her eyes and found herself confronting Appa's big furry face. The bison rumbled in greeting and gave her a wet, slobbery lick to her cheek. Found her! Sokka exclaimed from his perch on Appa's head. She blinked, absently rubbing her cheek and wondering who her brother was talking to, since there was no sight of Aang or even Momo. This puzzle was answered as Toph appeared from within the trees, blowing her fringe out of her face and carrying Momo on her shoulder. Told you she'd be here, Toph said smugly, then pointed a finger in Katara's general direction. Do me a favor, sweetness, next time you decide to go running off, do it when we're not being hunted by a bunch of freaks on lizards. Katara ignored the insult underlying this speech and instead asked the question that had been bothering her. How did you find me? Toph stamped one foot by way of explanation and smiled. Ah. Earthbending sensing, or whatever it was that Toph did with her grubby feet. Hey, can we talk about this later? Sokka said. We need to get out of here. Now. What's going on? Katara asked, standing up. Sokka told her about how they discovered, thanks to Toph, that the reason the girls had been able to chase them for so long was because Appa's fur was shedding and leaving a trail. They had washed Appa to get rid of most of the melting white clumps, which Aang had then collected and was going to use to lead their pursuers off in a different path. Meanwhile, Sokka, Toph, and Katara would make their escape and wait for Aang to join them later. But there's no way he can take on all three of those girls in his current state. Katara exclaimed, conscious of the way her stomach plummeted at just the thought. Sokka sighed. It's a risk, but this is the best plan we've got. Appa has had it. He needs to rest, and the only way he's going to get that is if we shake those crazy girls off our trail. Katara chewed on her bottom lip. She supposed Sokka was right. In fact, judging by the snuffling sounds coming from the bison, Appa had just fallen asleep, but still. What was Aang thinking going off alone? He might be the Avatar, not to mention currently in her black books, but he was still just a kid who needed sleep to function like anyone else. He was still her friend. We have to help him, she insisted, looking pleadingly up at Sokka. I think we might need to focus on helping ourselves first, Toph said, tensing and pointing towards the trees. Something is coming, and fast. Katara and Sokka exchanged a wary glance, but there was no time to speculate. A rustling came from within the bushes, getting louder and louder. Katara uncorked her water skin and took up a fighting stance, breathing slowly to focus her bending. Beside her, Sokka jumped off Appa and pulled out his boomerang and club. Toph just grinned, blank eyes gazing unseeingly at the trees. All of them were ready. All of them waited. A soft inhale, a fluttered heartbeat, and then two dark shapes emerged from the wall of trees, getting larger and more defined as the creatures know. The girls got closer. Momo took off with a screech, flying to safety up in the branches above. Miss me, the girl in pink said, leaping off the lizard-like creature she had been riding. Unlikely, Sokka retorted, and rushed to meet her in combat. Katara had no time to be worried for her brother. A flurry of knives came speeding towards her. She swung her hand out to form a wall of ice, but a giant upheaval of rock got there first, stopping the sharp projectiles in their tracks. Thanks, she muttered, casting a brief look of gratitude at Toph. Don't mention it. It was a small offering, an unspoken apology from both, but their bonding moment was cut short as Knife Girl released the mechanisms hidden beneath her sleeves, firing darts at them like tiny storms of metal. Toph stamped her foot into the ground, creating another wall to block the attack while Katara moved her arms in sharp, fluid motions, responding with her own projectiles of ice. Time for some payback. Knife Girl's eyes narrowed a fraction and she threw herself forward, sliding on her side beneath the flurry, then sprung up to her feet with two shurikens in hand. Katara and Toph both dodged the star-pointed weapons, though Katara just barely missed, having her cheek grazed with the kiss of metal. Damn, this girl was good. The Fire Nation warrior was like a splash of red silk that could move with unnerving speed, all hidden sharpness and razor blade. It was impossible to get in a hit, especially when combined with the pink-clad acrobat who kept somersaulting close, threatening to incapacitate anyone who got near with her lightning-fast punches. Dimly, Katara heard Sokka gasp in pain, but she didn't have time to check if he was okay. It was all she could do to keep Knife Girl from sticking her with one of those pointy weapons. That's it, Toph exclaimed, digging her feet into the ground. I'm bringing you down. Or at least she would have had the girl in pink not chosen that moment to somersault behind Toph and punch her along both arms and down her spine with calculated precision. No, Katara yelled. Toph went limp, milky eyes widening in horror, then collapsed to the ground not far from Sokka's prostrate form. Katara growled and got her water whips ready, determined to throw everything she had at her enemies, but it was too late. A series of stiletto knives pierced through her clothes, pinning her against one of the thick tree trunks. Well, that was disappointing, Knife Girl observed dryly, lowering her arm. Oh well, victory is boring. What should we do with them, Mai? The girl in pink asked. It doesn't look like the Avatar is here. Mai stared at the captives, meeting Katara's glare for a moment. There was no interest in those tawny eyes, only the bored resignation of a girl who had done her part and didn't care what happened next. Angela won't want us to let them go, she said flatly. Are you sure about that? Sokka questioned in a muffled voice. His face was mushed into the ground from where he had fallen paralyzed. I mean, if Crazy Blue Flames is only after Aang, then what good are we? Mai ignored his comment and faced her back to them. You brought the rope, right? Ty Lee tapped a finger to her chin. Yip. Then tie them up. We'll take them back to camp for questioning. Right. Ty Lee said, clapping her hands together as if this was all a fun game. She wandered over to the lizard creature and started rummaging in the saddle pack, no doubt looking for rope. Katara just glared at Mai, who was now collecting her weapons from the ground and slotting them back into the contraptions fastened to her forearms. Not to mention ignoring her captives completely. Anger bubbled within Katara. Just who did this girl think she was? Didn't she care about anything at all? Hey! Katara called, narrowing her eyes. You know, we were the ones who took care of your little brother back in Omashu. Aang even made sure he got back to your parents safely after you and your friends tried to kill us. Mai stiffened and her hands balled into fists, then quickly flexed. The action was so imperceptible that Katara might have missed it had she not been watching the other girl so closely, but there had definitely been a reaction. It seemed that Katara had touched a nerve. What's your point? Mai said blandly, turning to face her. Katara lifted her chin. You should be thanking us, not trying to capture us. That's right. Sokka chimed in, still with his face pressed against the dirt. We helped your family out. It's only fair you let us go in return. Mai tucked a shuriken inside her robe. Fair. She repeated almost pityingly. I hate to break it to you, but the world isn't fair. It's just a farce that follows the whims of the powerful regardless of what's right or wrong, let alone your own feelings. Her eyes hardened. There's no such thing as fairness. Better just accept it now. Ty Lee paused in her rummaging and stared at her friend with wide eyes, even a little sadness. Mai's lips tightened into a thin line and she turned the other way. Just tie them up. Oh, and make sure they don't go anywhere, she added with all the bored apathy only she could pull off. I don't feel like being in Angela's bad books again. Where are you going? Ty Lee asked, tilting her head to the side like a confused bird. Back to camp. Mai climbed gracefully on top of her lizard-like mount. I'll organize the tank to come pick you up, along with our. She cast a distasteful look at the incapacitated group, new additions. Ty Lee pouted. Leave me with guard duty. Her expression brightened and she leaned forward, pointing her finger at her friend. Fine, but make sure you save me some custard buns, okay? I won't make any promises. Mai. Ty Lee whined, pouting even more. I'm kidding. I'll save you a custard bun, now stop whinging and go tie them up before the paralysis wears off. Ty Lee jumped as if she had just remembered the presence of her immobile audience. Oh, right. Katara frowned as she watched the girl named Mai race off into the trees. That was one weird friendship. Soon, it was just the four of them left. Appa didn't count, since he was still snoring by the tree, and she had no idea where Momo had gone. Ty Lee beamed as she approached the trio, clutching a long coil of rope in her hand. I'm really sorry to do this, she said, and she actually sounded sincere, but orders are. Ryag. Ty Lee flinched, spinning around to face the source of the roar. Appa let out another bellowing rumble and thumped his tail on the ground, sending a giant gust of wind at the girl. She gasped in a choked sort of way and was carried up into the air, flailing helplessly as she was knocked back into the trees like a rag doll tossed by a tantrum-throwing child. Katara blinked in surprise, then started struggling in earnest, trying to break free of the tiny dart-like weapons that held her trapped against the trunk. Sokka, I'm stuck. Keep trying, Sokka urged. Creepy Pinky got me with her weird punching mojo. I can't move a muscle. Your mouth still appears to be working. That's different. Katara rolled her eyes and continued trying to free herself from being trapped as a human dartboard. It occurred to her that Toph had been awfully quiet since she'd been struck. Hey, Toph, she called, grunting with effort and wincing as a part of her robe ripped. You alright? I can't see. The voice was so small it barely seemed to belong to the brazen earthbender. Sokka let out a snort. Toph, you're blind. You always see nothing. Katara groaned. Why did her brother have to be so dense sometimes? She sees with her bending. Ty Lee has the power to take away someone's bending, so when Toph got hit, everything vanished, Toph finished. There was a long pause. Sorry, Sokka said a bit sheepishly. I forgot. Toph exhaled in a loud breath. Whatever. Someone just hurry up and fix this. Hold on, Katara said, struggling even more until she felt another piece of her robe tear. My bending is still intact, so I should be Momo. The lemur made a chittering sound and scrabbled down from the branches to remove the darts that kept Katara bound to the tree. She thanked him with a rub to his head, promising him a moon peach, and then hurried to heal Toph and Sokka with her bending. It wasn't easy since part of their chi had been blocked, but soon all three of them were back on Appa and following the trail of white clumps. It wasn't long before a collection of run-down buildings and dusty roads came into view. There, Katara murmured, pointing at the abandoned settlement. That's where the trail stops. Then let's go. Toph said, punching her fist into her palm. Aang needs our help. Katara nodded. Right. It was time to let go of her bitterness. Aang needed her, and she would never abandon a person in need. She just hoped they would get there in time. Oh. A dry breeze swirled through the street, ruffling clothes, and kicking up dust with careless fingers. Zuko's heart pounded and he urged the ostrich horse to run faster. He was running out of time. At the end of the alleyway, he could see Azula facing the Avatar in the middle of the road as if in a standoff, her posture relaxed and with a wicked smile curling her lips. Aang, on the other hand, seemed to be half leaning on his staff. It was obvious that he was exhausted. Do you really want to fight me? Azula asked, examining one pointed nail. Zuko burst onto the street and jumped off his ostrich horse, fluidly landing in a half-crouch. Yes, he gritted out, throwing off his mask and shifting into a bending stance. I really do. All the color drained from Azula's face. It only lasted for a second, but it was enough. Her calm had been shaken. You're meant to be dead, she said coldly. This had been the wrong thing to say. Zuko's eyes narrowed and fire blossomed from his clenched fists. Sorry to disappoint you, he spat, and then unleashed a torrent of flames at his sister. Azula dodged the attack with the whip-like speed that had always categorized her fighting before countering with one of her own blue fireballs. A gust of wind rushed between them, blowing the sapphire flames out of Zuko's path and into the building opposite. Suddenly, the Avatar was moving to flank Azula, but Zuko threw his hand out in a burst of fire, which flared up in front of Aang like a wall of orange. Stay out of this. Zuko growled. But I can help. If we fight together, we can. I said stay back. Zuko turned his head to glare at him. This is my fight. A cold laugh escaped Azula's lips. Oh, Zuzu, you really are dense. Surely you must see that you can't win. She shook her head in mock despair. You'd think you would have learned your lesson from the last time. I won't be making the same mistake again. This time I will make you pay. Her mouth curved into a cruel smile. Suddenly, she was running, launching a volley of flames at him with a calculated kick and two quick punches that shadowed her movements in arcs of blue. He blocked the first attack and dodged the others, using his momentum to counter with a blast of flames. She just laughed and sidestepped his attack as if it was nothing, then elbowed him in the chin. He reeled back, quickly bringing up a shield of fire to deflect her next blow. She was so fast. He tried to match her step for step, but she was always that fraction quicker, always that fraction more accurate. It was as if she knew exactly what he was going to do before he even did it, and the sharp little smile playing on her lips did nothing to assuage his anger. Zuko growled in frustration and charged her with flames trailing from his fists. Red mist burned behind his eyes as they clashed in a collision of sapphire and orange, so hot he could feel the heat licking at his skin. Duck, parry, attack. His mind chanted the movements, urging him to move, to dodge, to do anything in his power to survive and bring his sister down. He couldn't lose to her. Not again. What's the matter, Zuzu? She taunted, flashing her teeth in a vicious smile. Getting tired already? Shut up. His forearm collided with hers in a double block, flames sparking between them in a hiss of heat. He grunted and pushed hard with his elbow, trying to use his greater strength to his advantage. She stumbled back and he quickly followed with a fire uppercut, but this time she was ready for him. One step to the left, a quick adjustment, and then her foot looped around his and tugged him off balance. He tried to use the momentum of falling to shift into a counter stance, but she rammed the heel of her palm hard into his face. His head thwacked against the ground from the impact and he sucked in a sharp breath, blinking away the black spots that danced in front of his eyes. Angela leaned over him, a ball of blue fire glowing above her hand. "You lose," she said calmly. His eyes widened as he realized what was coming, even as another part of him screamed at his body to move. He didn't even think, he just acted, pushing down on the ground with one hand and sweeping his legs out in a circular motion that morphed into flames. She hadn't expected that. Her eyes widened and she fell back onto one knee, gasping. A few strands of hair had fallen out of place. For the first time, she didn't look so perfect. "I won't lose to you," Zuko panted, getting back to his feet. "I don't care how good you think you are. I don't care if the whole world thinks I have no chance. This time I won't lose." Angela laughed and stood up, smoothing her hair back into place. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You're not going to beat me. You're simply not good enough." She smiled her sharp little smile. "But don't worry, I'll put you out of your misery soon enough." Zuko made an inhuman sound of fury and lashed out at her with everything he had. She matched him blow for blow, smiling as if this was all an amusing game. It was infuriating. She was infuriating. He knew his attacks were getting sloppier, more reckless, leaving him open to attack, but he couldn't help it. This monster was his sister, this girl who didn't seem to care at all that she had almost killed him with lightning or that he had been suffering for so long. He wanted to hurt her. He wanted to make her bleed and bruise and feel any kind of pain. But in the end it was Zuko who ended up on the ground, bruised and trembling with emotions that refused to be contained. "Why?" he rasped, staring up at Angela's blurred figure. She kept flickering in and out of focus. "Why did you do it? You're my sister." His voice broke on the last word as if it was physically painful to speak. Angela just appraised him through her cold, calculating eyes. They both knew he was referring to the fact that she had struck him with lightning, tried to kill him in what had looked to be cold blood. She pressed her boot against his chest, pushing him down against the dusty earth. "You signed your own death sentence when you went against me. You should have known your place. A pathetic firebender like you has no chance against me. You're just a weak little boy who is not fit to be the heir. Even father agrees with me. That's why he sent me to bring you back to the Fire Nation, because you'd failed one too many times and he was tired of you embarrassing him." Zuko blinked as black dots swarmed before his eyes. She was lying. She was always lying, but then hadn't he seen the memories? Fire and tears and a cold arena floor pressing against his knees, screams and blood and the smell of burning flesh. It was all there in his mind, but he was just so confused and he didn't know what was right anymore. He just didn't know. Angela dug her heel into his chest, grinding into the bone. "Face it, Zuzu. Mother might have loved you the most, but she's not around anymore. No one is here to protect you. It's just you and me, and me." Aang finished, and sent her flying down the street with a blast of wind. Zuko blinked and stared dazedly at him, watching the arrow on his forehead shift and move in a blue swirl. He opened his mouth to tell the Avatar off for interfering because, damn it, he didn't need the brat's help, but no words came out. Instead, Zuko's vision swarmed even more with black dots until all he could see was an endless expanse of inky darkness. Thoughts trickled through his mind like cupped sand: anger at his sister, anger at the Avatar, confusion and despair and loneliness and longing, and his eyes fluttered open, presenting him with a view of a sky bathed in the colors of fire. He could smell smoke and, as his senses adjusted to being awake again, could hear the distinct grunts and clashes of a bending fight. Zuko was on his feet in an instant, following the noises as he sprinted down the maze-like streets and alleys. The sound of pounding feet and bending was getting louder. He quickened his pace and rounded a corner to see Angela dash past him. He shot a fireball at her, which she dodged, and then found himself running side by side Katara. Their eyes met for a fraction, and he could see in her gaze a myriad of emotions that were too convoluted to make any sense to him. He focused on the street ahead. There was no time to get distracted, only to run. The hunt was on, and the predator in him could sense that they were closing in on their prey. More were joining him, closing in around Angela from all sides. There was the Avatar and Sokka. Katara was on Zuko's left, and a little girl in green, who he didn't recognize, had taken up the far left flank. A larger figure moved to take up the position on his right. Zuko's breath came short and fast. He would recognize that beard anywhere. His uncle was here. His uncle was here and... Well, look at this, Angela said calmly, turning to face them all. Enemies and traitors working together. She raised her hands, holding them palm up. I'm done. You got me. A princess knows when to surrender with honor. No one moved. Zuko didn't think he could. His mind was a jumble, staggered by the fact that his uncle was right there. He chanced a glance at the old man from the corner of his eye, but Iroh wasn't looking at him. Those reddish-brown eyes were fixed on Aang as if Iroh had just realized who else was forming the circle and then shifted to Zuko in wide-eyed wonder. That was when Angela's mouth curved into a sharp little smile. Her hands moved faster than seemed possible, releasing a streak of lightning that lashed out like a whip. Zuko's heart stuttered in his chest, but the energy was crackling past his face, heading more to the right end. No. The cry was wrenched from him, raw and primal. He retaliated with a surge of fire even as he saw his uncle's body fall from out the corner of his eye. Wind, water, earth, and even a boomerang joined his flames, all heading straight for Angela. She moved her arms in a swift motion and he caught a glimpse of blue a fire shield and then everything seemed to explode in a cloud of smoke and dust. It was impossible to see, but he already knew she would be gone by the time the debris and smoke cleared. She was much too clever not to make use of the commotion. Not that it mattered now. Zuko swallowed against the hard lump forming in his throat and let his fire die out. He slumped to his knees beside his uncle and clutched at his tunic, conscious of the stuttering heartbeat that he could feel beneath his palm. It felt so weak. "Uncle," he choked out, curling his fingers into the rough fabric. "Please, no. This can't be happening. Not now. I've only just found you again." Iroh groaned but his eyes remained shut. Zuko didn't know what to do. It hadn't looked as if Angela had struck Iroh with a full-powered lightning bolt, not like the one she had fired at him on the ship, in any case, but then Iroh was an old man and did not have Zuko's weird ability to heal faster than normal. Wait, he could heal. Hadn't he done the same for the Avatar? Frantically, he placed his hands over the smoking, charred spot where Angela had struck Iroh and willed the wound to fix itself. This time the sharp tug on his gut was almost instant, as if the tiny sun he could feel burning inside him had already been reaching out to Iroh, urged by Zuko's own desperation. "Heal!" he inwardly screamed. "Heal, heal, heal." The connection sharpened. Dimly, he was aware of Aang standing near him and Katara trying to tell him something, but they were just pebbles of insignificance to him in that moment. All that mattered was that he needed to help his uncle, because though he was confused and uncertain of who to trust now, if anyone at all, he knew that he couldn't do this alone. He needed Iroh. Zuko closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He felt smoldering embers mixed in with charred flesh and ripples of pain. He could feel his uncle every wounded inch of the man, right down to the heartbeat that fluttered in his grasp. More energy was needed to fill this damage, and he let it all flow in a rush of pale gold, surging through his palms to the anchor that joined him and his uncle as one. Desperate to mend what needed to be mended. Too much. He sucked in a sharp breath, wincing as the tugging on his own inner flame became too insistent, too demanding. It hurt. "Zuko, stop." Zuko blinked at the sound of Aang's voice, almost sluggishly, as if he were waking from a long sleep. His body felt heavy and weak, and it was then he realized that he was shaking. He also felt cold. Really, really cold. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Aang demanded, releasing his wrists. Zuko just blinked in a daze, too weak and disorientated to really make sense of what was happening. His vision blurred in a swarm of dizzying splotches and lights and he swayed, eyes rolling back into his head. By the time his body hit the ground, he had passed out cold. Chapter 14, Aftermath. Aang was on his knees in an instant. "Hey." He tucked his arm around Zuko's limp form, holding him up against his lap. "Zuko, are you okay?" "Zuko." There was no response. Not even a flutter of an eyelash. Panic flared in Aang's chest. This wasn't right. It was a whisper in his heart, no, his very soul. Something had gone wrong during the healing, because that was what Zuko had been doing. He had been trying to heal the old man. Everyone had felt the sheer warmth and radiance emanating from him as if his body had become a sun of life-giving light. Aang had been especially sensitive to the exchange, but then a chill had crept around his heart and he'd seen the way Zuko had started to tremble, seen the color drain from his cheeks and his breathing come short and fast as if every breath was a struggle. Pulse. Check for a pulse. Frantic now, Aang's fingers brushed against Zuko's wrist as he felt for the vital rhythm. He flinched back in surprise. "He's cold as ice," he exclaimed, raising his head to stare at his companions. "I knew something had happened. We have to help him." Everyone turned to look at Katara. She was the only one with healing powers. It made sense that she would be the one to step forward, but her eyes were wide and she seemed frozen in place, just clutching the moon-like pendant at her throat. "Katara, please," Aang begged. "Please, I know you're upset with me because I lied, and I know I have no right to ask this of you, but I owe Zuko my life. I owe him so much. Please, isn't there anything you can do?" For a moment she said nothing. She didn't even move. Then she let out a breath and life seemed to spring back into her body. Her fingers released the death grip she had on her necklace and she knelt beside Aang and summoned the water from her flask, calm and methodical. "Hold him still," she said, not meeting Aang's eyes. Aang did as ordered and watched as Katara held glowing palms to Zuko's temples. Slowly, she moved the water down, feeling for any trace of what had caused him to go unconscious. A few creases gathered on her brow. Not a good sign. "There are no wounds," she said, pursing her lips. "Aside from a few bruises, there doesn't appear to be anything really wrong with him." Her hands moved back to his stomach area. "Maybe he's just worn out, but then that doesn't explain why he's so cold or..." "Sunlight." Aang turned at the new voice and was surprised to see the old man sitting up. Iroh groaned slightly as he rolled his shoulder in an experimental way, testing the part where Azula's lightning had struck, but he otherwise seemed fine. Zuko's healing must have paid off. He turned to face them with a benign smile. What?" Aang blinked. "Did you just say sunlight?" Iroh nodded and moved to kneel between Aang and Katara. Without preamble, he started removing Zuko's boots and clothes as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Katara made a choked, spluttering noise. What are you doing?" she demanded, looking away. "Firebenders gather their energy from the sun," Iroh explained patiently. "Zuko has lost an alarming amount of chi. I know because I've seen these symptoms before, though never this bad. The fastest way for him to recover is to have direct skin contact with sunlight." He cast an anxious glance at the fire-colored sky. "I only hope we're not too late. The sun has almost set." Sokka frowned and gripped Toph by her shoulders, turning her the other way. What are you doing?" Toph asked. "You shouldn't be looking at him like that." "It's not," Sokka struggled for the right word, "decent." Toph rolled her milky green eyes. "I'm blind." There was a pause, broken only by the sound of Katara slapping her palm against her forehead. "Right." Sokka released Toph's shoulders and folded his arms across his chest, trying to look dignified. "Well, you still shouldn't be looking. I mean, with those earthbendy feet sensors of yours, who knows what you see?" Toph just stared in his general direction with a blank expression. "Anyway," Aang said, looking back at the old firebender, "you're saying that all Zuko needs to do is rest here under the sun and he'll get better?" Iroh spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "That's what I'm hoping. It worked the last time, so it should help again." "Then I guess we wait," Aang declared. He sat cross-legged and rested his chin on his hands, watching Zuko as if he would be able to see the sun working its magic in seconds. "I'll go collect Appa and Momo," Sokka said with a sigh. Katara got to her feet. "Then I'll see if I can find us some water." Aang made a non-committal sound that might have been a thank you. The knot of anxiety unsettling his stomach had eased a little since he'd learned sunlight might help, but he still couldn't help but feel worried. This was not the reunion he had been expecting. He hated seeing Zuko so helpless and vulnerable. He wished there was something he could do to help. "You're really sure this sunlight thing is going to work?" Aang asked, glancing up at Iroh. Iroh paused in the middle of making a pillow out of Zuko's tunic. "Do you have any better ideas?" Aang shook his head. "Then I guess we'll just have to wait and see." Iroh's eyes softened as he looked down at his nephew. Zuko is strong. Frustratingly reckless sometimes and determined to give his uncle a heart attack, but in all the years I have traveled with him, I have yet to see him come up against an obstacle that he hasn't been able to overcome. I know he'll pull through this. A faint smile curved Aang's lips. "You're right. If there's one thing I've learned about Zuko, it's that he never gives up." "No, he doesn't," Iroh agreed with a chuckle, "though I admit there is something that puzzles me. How did you get my nephew to stop hunting you?" "I've tried for 3 years to hint him into giving up his mission, but nothing could budge him from wanting to please his father and return home." Toph blew her fringe out of her eyes and leaned back on her palms. "I'd like to know more about this Zuko guy as well. You guys haven't exactly told me much about what happened before I joined you." Aang brought his legs up to his chest, hugging his knees. "I don't really know if I understand everything myself, but I guess things first started to change when Zuko rescued me from Pahue's stronghold." Before he knew it, he was telling them all about the night he was saved by the Blue Spirit and the events that followed, how Zuko had healed his wound and stopped him from dying, how they had fought as allies against Admiral Zhao on the river bank, how he had learned that he had a spiritual connection with Zuko, which made it possible for him to sense when Zuko was in mortal danger. He told them everything, even the conversation the two had shared in the prison at the North Pole. Sokka and Katara had come back while he had talked, along with Momo and Appa, and Aang had directed his words as much at them as he had Toph and Iroh. He wanted them to understand the bond he shared with Zuko and why a person that should be his enemy had come to mean so much to him. "I don't know if he feels the same," Aang admitted, shaking his head. "I've done a lot of stupid things that I really regret now, but even if he won't accept my friendship, I can't go back to seeing him as an enemy." He stared earnestly at Katara and Sokka. "Zuko is a good person. He's always been there for me, even when he was trying to capture me. I know it seems strange to you, but I can't give up on him now. I just can't." Katara said nothing and gazed at Zuko with her brow furrowed, clearly lost in her own thoughts. Aang wished he knew what she was thinking, but then Sokka clapped him on the shoulder, jolting him from his musings. "You don't need to explain yourself, Aang," Sokka said. "We get it. I mean, I won't deny that it bothered me when you lied to us about his identity, and I still wouldn't trust him with a barrel of seal jerky, but he has helped you out and I guess Lee wasn't so bad. If you're right that Lee and Zuko aren't so different, then maybe you're also right that Zuko isn't such a bad guy." Sokka shrugged. "Either way, he helped us kick crazy blue flames' butt, and that has to be a good thing." "She still got away, though," Toph said bitterly. Iroh stroked his beard. "Yes, it worries me that Azula escaped. She is a dangerous enemy to have, and today you hurt her pride. I do not doubt that she will be planning something." "Then we'll just have to beat her again," Aang said. "It's my duty to bring down the Fire Lord and restore balance to the world. I'm not going to let anyone get in my way, especially not some crazy girl who attacks my friends." "That crazy girl is Zuko's sister," Iroh said grimly. "She's also a prodigy and extremely intelligent. Do not underestimate her." Something clenched in Aang's stomach. "I know." His gaze shifted back to Zuko, who lay unconscious on the dusty ground, bruised and scarred. Aang didn't understand. Why would Azula attack her own brother? He knew that Sokka and Katara had their disagreements, but they would never actively seek to wound the other to the point of putting their lives in danger. "Zuko's relationship with his sister has always been complicated," Iroh explained, as if able to hear Aang's thoughts. "The older both of them have got, the worse things have become between them." Creases formed on his brow, aging him another 10 years. "I wish it were otherwise, but I'm afraid Azula will not stop until she has removed her brother as a rival and has taken you prisoner, Avatar." Aang didn't know what to say. Somehow, it didn't seem so easy now to think he could just defeat her again with Iroh looking at him so grimly. It wasn't as if Aang knew the girl, and just surviving their 3 encounters hadn't been a walk in the park. He knew he would not have won today had he been alone. It made him wonder what it would be like to battle the Fire Lord. Would Oze be even craftier, even more skilled? Knots twisted in his stomach, filling him with a sickly, nervous sensation. Best not to think about that right now. There would be plenty of time to worry about how to deal with the Fire Lord after he had mastered the 4 elements. Well, I'm just glad we're all okay, Aang said, hastily changing the subject. I mean, Zuko is unconscious, but you said that sun thing should work, so he's bound to wake up sooner or later and he was babbling. Aang knew it, but he couldn't seem to stop the words from gushing out in an awkward mess, like congee spilling from an upturned pot. He could feel Katara and Sokka looking at him in concern, perhaps sensing his agitation, but he just plowed on until he was forced to pause for a proper breath. By that point, Toph had mercifully distracted their attention by asking Iroh some questions about himself. She was curious to know more about the old man, and Sokka and Katara didn't seem to mind learning about the enigma that was the Dragon of the West either. A sigh escaped Aang's lips. Thank the spirits for that. The last thing he wanted to do was explain to his friends how terrified he was of actually facing the Fire Lord. Sure, he talked with a lot of bravado about his duty and how he had to restore balance to the world, but Aang hated thinking too deeply about how that would actually happen. It was easier to focus on other things, like the fact that he had to master earthbending or his complicated, on and off again friendship with Zuko. Momo leapt off Sokka's shoulder and started sniffing Zuko's hand, then his arm, as if trying to figure out why this scarred, unconscious boy smelt just like the masked one that used to travel with them. Suddenly, he made a chirruping noise and crawled on Zuko's stomach where he sat perched like a long-eared, furry guard. The sight brought a smile to Aang's lips. Well, aren't you a handsome little fellow, Iroh said, and scratched Momo under the chin, much to the lemur's delight. That's Momo, Aang explained. He took a liking to Zuko when he was traveling with us as the Blue Spirit. My nephew always did have a way with animals, Iroh mused thoughtfully. At least, when he wasn't letting his impatience get the better of him. He chuckled. The stories I could tell you. Sokka needed no further encouragement. He was very eager to learn all about Zuko's embarrassing stories. The gleeful smile on his face was a little worrying, truth be told. Fortunately, Iroh was more than happy to share, quite oblivious to the fact that his nephew would be displeased if he knew what was going on. Soon, the whole group were laughing as Iroh told tales about his travels, including the time Zuko had got chased by an angry saber-toothed moose lion for over an hour when he was 13 after accidentally walking into its nesting ground. The crew gave him such a hard time afterwards, Iroh said, shaking his head with a rueful smile, but I still couldn't help but be proud of him. What do you mean? Katara asked. Iroh's expression softened. I asked Zuko why he let the animal chase him for so long. He said with perfect seriousness that he didn't want to risk hurting it with his firebending because the mother was just protecting her babies, and that's what moms do. Something shifted in Katara's expression as if a shadow had passed over her. She clutched the pendant at her throat and fell silent, no longer amused. Even Sokka looked a bit grim. Aang wondered why such a statement should bother them so much. Was it something to do with their deceased mother? Toph wriggled her finger inside her nose. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting hungry. Got any food in that bag of yours, old man? Iroh chuckled and reached for his pack. I don't have much food, but I can make us some tea. I'm sure Zuko will like some when he wakes up, anyway. Aang smiled. Tea sounded excellent. It had been a long time since he'd had a good cup of tea. Even Sokka and Katara looked intrigued, which had to be a good sign. Finally, everyone was getting along. Finally, everything was going right. And if somewhere out there Azula was plotting something horrible to pay them back for what they did today, well, they would deal with that later. After all, even if Aang was vulnerable on his own, he knew he could take down anyone with his friends at his side. Azula didn't stand a chance. Oh. The sky was darkening. Azula gritted her teeth and urged her eelhound to run faster. She couldn't believe that Zuko was alive. A part of her still remembered the way her heart had jolted in a dizzying rush when she had seen his face, how her emotions had tangled and collided in a confusing mess, so intense she'd felt like an invisible hand had shoved her right in the chest. Why did you do it? You're my sister. Angela made a strangled sound in the back of her throat and gripped the reins so hard her knuckles burned white. Just stop thinking about it. Zuko was a weak, pathetic excuse for a prince who their father even saw as expendable. Besides, he had teamed up with the Avatar to fight against her. He had betrayed his people. Traitor, she hissed. Iroh and Zuko were nothing more than enemies to the Fire Nation now. At least she had managed to get in a good shot at her uncle, but Zuko had surprised her. He'd fought better than the last time they'd dueled. For a moment she had even been a little worried, that is until he had let his anger get the better of him and started using sloppy bending and obvious attacks that even an idiot would have been able to predict. Really, her brother would never learn. Angela closed her eyes and inhaled a calming breath. She felt better now. Less agitated and confused. It was easy to compartmentalize her feelings for Zuko into the little box in her mind labeled unpractical when she wasn't confronted with him. Compassion never got a person anywhere. Just look at where it had got Zuko, scarred, banished and alone. She would not make the same mistake. She was the good child, the useful child. Their father would never have a reason to be disappointed in her. I don't know what is wrong with that child. Her smug smile tightened, twisting into a vicious sort of grimace. Her mother's voice was always haunting her, had been for as long as she could remember since Mother had first disappeared. Sometimes, Angela thought she could even see the woman staring at her with that same look of disappointment and repulsion, as if the girl she had called daughter were some kind of monster. Angela clenched her fists even tighter, feeling her nails dig crescent wounds into her palms. It was a relief when she saw the camp come into sight. She'd never admit it, but she hated being alone. There was no distraction from the voices in her head when she only had herself for company. She needed to vent some of her frustration. What better way than to scold her dear friends for botching up their task of keeping the Avatar's tag-alongs busy and thus ruining her own plans? Where are Mai and Ty Lee? She demanded, stopping in front of one of the camp guards. The man bowed in a twitchy sort of way and stuttered something about a tank and Mai and how something had gone wrong and... Enough. Angela snapped. Just send them to my tent when they get here. Yes, Your Highness, the guard replied, bowing so low his head bumped his knees. Angela walked past the guard without a second glance and headed for her tent. She ordered a servant to prepare her a bath while another began removing her armor. No one could ever do anything right around here. She couldn't even trust Mai and Ty Lee to get the job done, which was a disappointment. People always seemed to be letting her down of late. Like your brother. She stiffened, causing the servant who was undressing her to look up in surprise. Are you all right, princess? Angela's eyes narrowed. Did I ask you to speak? And no, princess, the servant stammered. Then be silent and do your job. The servant bobbed her head in a quick bow and went back to removing pieces of armor bit by bit, careful not to do anything that might cause a second scolding. Angela almost smiled. Almost. It often amused her to torment her underlings, but right now she was too irritated. Memories of Zuko kept escaping the little box that she liked to keep him locked inside. Worse, she now had to write a letter to her father explaining that Zuko was actually alive. Typical Zuko. Always ruining everything. No doubt his healing powers had come into play. She would have to remember not to underestimate the extent of his ability in the future. But no matter. She would tell her father the good news and then counter that with the unfortunate information that Zuko, along with Iroh, had indeed become a traitor to the Fire Nation. Her brother had no hope of ever reclaiming his place as the heir to the throne. The servant removed the red headpiece from Angela's hair, letting the black locks tumble free to her waist. Meanwhile, the woman who had been preparing the bath came forward and helped to strip Angela. Both women then stepped back with a bow, keeping their eyes on the ground. Angela walked over to the brass tub, which was now steaming with hot water. She dipped a finger in the bath and glanced at her servants. Leave, she ordered. Yes, princess, they chanted, still keeping their gaze lowered. Angela waited until the tent doors had folded closed before stepping into the bath. She shut her eyes as she sank back into the water, letting the liquid heat wash over her and ease some of the tension tightening her chest. The frantic voices in her mind were finally beginning to calm, allowing her to think, to plan. She was still thus engaged when she heard a servant call to her from outside. "Speak," Angela responded with her eyes closed. "Your Highness, Mai and Tai Li are here waiting to report to you." Angela frowned and got out of the bath, slipping on a loose robe. "Send them in." The tent door was pulled back, and Angela watched as Mai and Tai Li entered. Her sharp eyes were quick to note the bump on Tai Li's head, as well as the scrapes and bruises on her arms. Mai didn't have a hair out of place. "What happened?" Angela demanded. "We lost," Tai Li said with a pout. "Well, we didn't actually lose, but..." Angela's eyebrow rose as Tai Li stumbled through her explanation. Mai stepped in to help clarify matters, which did little to ease Angela's frustration. They had been so close and Tai Li blew it because of that ridiculous ball of fluff. Vicious words of censure burned her tongue. Such failure could not be tolerated, but then she just sighed and pressed a hand to her temple. "Very well," she said in a much calmer tone. "I guess it can't be helped." The two girls exchanged surprised glances. No doubt they were expecting a reprimand, and would have deserved it, but Angela found she didn't have the energy. Mai and Tai Li were still her only friends, and the perfectionist part of her knew that if she had not wasted so much time fighting Zuko, she could have captured the Avatar herself. In the end, she was as much at fault. "Are you all right, Angela?" Tai Li asked, tilting her head like a curious sparrowkeet. "Your aura is looking a little gray." Mai rolled her eyes. She had never believed in auras. Angela didn't either for that matter, but she couldn't deny that Tai Li could be rather astute when she wanted. "Zuko is alive," Angela said coolly. Mai's eyes widened a fraction, but she otherwise didn't seem to react. It was Tai Li who gasped theatrically and pressed her hands against her cheeks. "He's alive!" she exclaimed. "But I thought you said he drowned in the ocean." "I thought he did," Angela admitted. "He had been struck with lightning. There was no way he should have survived, yet there he was earlier helping to protect the Avatar and demanding to fight me." That did get a reaction out of Mai. "What do you mean?" she asked, taking a step forward. "Why would Zuko protect the Avatar?" Angela tucked a damp lock of hair behind her ears. "It seems my brother has become a traitor to the Fire Nation. From what I saw today, he's sided with the Avatar." Tai Li frowned and pressed a finger to her chin. I guess he really is our enemy now." Mai said nothing. Angela was tempted to prod and push to figure out what the stoic girl was thinking, but if she were to be completely honest, she was still trying to figure out what she thought herself. Emotions tumbled and roiled within her, anger and confusion tangled up with memories of the past, of the little moments of affection in a big brother who hadn't always been so pathetic in her eyes. She'd wanted to hurt him earlier. Still did. He was like a thorn digging into her heart, painful yet still close enough to be part of the life-giving beat. No. She couldn't let him get to her. She had to be strong. Angela plastered a mask of cruel apathy on her face. "My brother chose his path. If he wants to betray the Fire Nation, he will have to face the consequences. Traitors will not be tolerated." Tai Li bit her lip. "Yeah, but..." "Angela is right," Mai said in an expressionless voice. "Zuko made his choice. There's nothing we can do." No one said anything. Tai Li just pouted in a dispirited way while Mai was like stone shaped into the form of a girl. Angela averted her face and caught a glimpse of Ursa in the coarse folds of the tent, face blurred into the fabric. Words whispered in her mind, taunting her in her mother's voice. "Is this what you really want, Angela? Will you simply forget about the past?" Angela closed her eyes. Then she locked all of her hurt, all of her doubts, into that tiny box in her mind. She had to be strong. She had to start planning. Oh. Warmth. Zuko could feel it tingling through his body, breathing new life into exhausted limbs. A twitch of his fingers, a flutter of eyelashes. Like a newborn he struggled to make sense of his waking form, feeling oddly disconnected with himself as if his spirit had separated with his body and was now slowly knitting itself back together. His chest rose and fell, relaxed and steady. He felt the thrum of his heart vibrating through him, pulsing with blood, with life. Life. That's right. He had tried to heal his uncle. Of course it had gone wrong. His healing powers were unpredictable and dangerous. He knew that yet. It was Uncle. Uncle Iroh who had cared for him when no else would. Uncle who had stayed by him, mentored him, and abandoned him. The whisper of betrayal was like a tiny thread of fire burning through his heart, slowly turning everything to ashes. He hadn't wanted to acknowledge it before, had buried the feeling so far down that he had almost forgotten about it. There had been so much going on and he had been so scared and uncertain when he'd had amnesia, confused about his past and in whom he could trust. Then Iroh had appeared out of nowhere and Zuko had been so relieved. Finally, the search was over. Now he just didn't know what to think. A part of him didn't want to leave the shadowy cocoon of his mind. It was better here in this imagined world. Reality only brought betrayal and pain. Reality was cruel and unforgiving, torturing him with yearnings that could not be fulfilled in a past that was as scarring as the wound on his face. He didn't want it. He wanted to be a child again and not deal with the fact that his father thought of him as worthless, his sister wanted to kill him, his mother had vanished, and even his uncle had abandoned him in the North Pole. He was just so tired. Zuko's hand twitched again. The real world tugged at his consciousness, pulling him out from the mist of scattered thoughts and shadows. A mantra he had long ago engraved into his mind burned through his thoughts. Never give up without a fight. His fingers curled into fists. Zuko could admit that he wanted to run from it all, run back to a time when he didn't feel so broken. He was confused and exhausted and hurt. But he also knew that he couldn't give up. Not this time. He had come too far, suffered too much. If he stopped now, if he stayed in this cocoon of denial, it would all have been for nothing. His very existence would mean nothing. He opened his eyes. Old wooden beams, coated with dust and cobwebs, greeted his vision. He blinked and turned his head to see his uncle sitting beside him, fussing around with a teapot and some wooden cups. It was so typical of Iroh that it made Zuko's heart ache in an odd mixture of joy and sadness. "Stupid old man," he said in a hoarse voice, though affection was hinted in every word. "Still obsessed with your tea even when you're living like a beggar." Iroh almost dropped the cup he had been holding. "Zuko." Zuko found himself being pulled into a tight hug. His uncle's scratchy beard rubbed against his cheek. "I'm so sorry," Iroh mumbled over and over. "I'm so sorry I left you. I'm so sorry you had to go through all that pain by yourself. If I had known, if I had just stayed a bit longer in the North Pole." Zuko remained frozen in Iroh's arms. Here was the explanation he had wanted, but he realized as he sat there clutched against his uncle's chest that something had changed between them. There was a distance that hadn't been there before, as if the stability of their relationship had been damaged and now little cracks were forming to weaken the foundation. "He left you. He left you to be a prisoner to those people. How do you really know he even cares, let alone is sorry? No one else in your family loves you, so why should he?" Zuko forced the hurtful words to the back of his mind and returned his uncle's embrace. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, breathing in the familiar scent of tea leaves and herbs that he had for so long associated with Iroh. He didn't want to dwell on doubts right now, even if he couldn't quite erase them. Iroh pulled back and clutched him by the shoulders. "You have changed so much. I barely recognized you at first." Zuko shrugged out of his uncle's touch and ran a hand through his messy hair. "Well, you don't look so grand yourself," he retorted, gesturing at Iroh's untamed beard and mud-stained clothes. Iroh spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "The dung roach cannot become a butterfly mantis." Zuko's eyebrow rose. The proverbs were something he had definitely not missed. Iroh chuckled. "I mean that I have become an inconspicuous beggar since the Fire Nation branded me a traitor and, alas, must also dress like one." He laughed again and rubbed his paunch-like belly. "It is not all bad. I think this forced poverty has made me lose weight." At Zuko's blank stare, Iroh smiled in a sad sort of way and reached over to take his hand. "Perhaps you're right that this is not the time for jokes. There is much we need to discuss. I wanted to ask you about your Zuko." Aang bounded in with a gust of wind and went to throw himself at Zuko in what could only be described as a tackle hug, but then he stopped short. He scratched his bald head and chewed on his lip. I mean hi," he said shyly. Zuko stared at him for a moment and then turned to his uncle. Why is the Avatar still here? Aang's expression fell. He stared at his feet, scuffing the toe of his shoe against the floor. I wanted to make sure you were okay. You had me really worried. Well, I'm fine. Zuko made to stand, but his legs wobbled under his weight and he found himself being held up by his uncle. Don't push yourself too hard, Iroh warned, helping him lay back down. You've lost a lot of energy. Zuko gritted his teeth. Damn his body for being so weak. Aang took a step forward. Listen, I think we need to. I don't want to hear it, Zuko interrupted. Don't you think you've done enough? Hey. Zuko swung his head round at the new voice to see the little girl in green standing in the doorframe, hand on her hip. You've got no right to speak to Twinkle Toes that way, she said, pointing a finger at him. This whole time he's been at your side worried sick on your behalf. The least you can do is hear him out. Zuko's eyes narrowed. Who are you? He demanded rudely. That's Toph, Aang mumbled, still staring at his feet. My, earthbending teacher. Toph jutted her chin and glared at Zuko through milky green eyes. No, not glared at him, it was more like she was gazing in his general direction. It was then that Zuko realized she was blind. Whatever, he muttered, looking the other way. Just go bother someone else. He needed time to think. He needed time to pull himself together and figure out what he really wanted. Perhaps Iroh sensed this, because he steered the children out of the house with a few, well-chosen words. Soon, it was just Iroh and Zuko again. Thank you, Zuko said simply. Iroh nodded. I heard the Avatar's story. I can see that you have still not forgiven him. Zuko remained silent. Yes. No. He wasn't sure. Too much had happened. Iroh sighed. Well, perhaps it is better if you just get some rest tonight. We can talk tomorrow. He stood up and headed for the door, pausing to look over his shoulder at the prince. I'll bring some food for you, and please help yourself to the tea. It's jasmine, nice and kel. Calming, Zuko finished with a wry smile. I know. The corner of Iroh's mouth quirked in an answering grin. For a moment, everything was back to normal. It was just like when they were on the ship together, repeating the same old routine that had always been their bickering but tender relationship. There was so much kindness in Iroh's eyes, so much understanding but also regret. Zuko hated that it couldn't last. Somehow, even with his memories, he was still a jigsaw with a single piece missing. He knew that he had to find the way to make himself whole. Chapter 15, Crossroads. Zuko awoke the next morning to find that he was alone in the abandoned house. For a moment, he almost wondered if he had just been dreaming everything that had happened, the fight, the reunion, the lightning. Then he spotted his uncle's belongings stacked neatly in the corner, along with the wooden cup that still held the dregs of jasmine tea. So, it wasn't a dream. He should have been happy. In truth, he was just exhausted. Sighing, he pushed the blankets off his legs and stood up, stretching to ease the stiffness out of his limbs. He'd been too tired and overwhelmed last night to register that someone had stripped off most of his clothing. Now he stared at his bared skin in resignation. Obviously, his uncle's work. Zuko would have been more upset had he not sensed the necessity behind the action. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the wooden boards, letting him absorb into his body all of the energy contained within the golden streams. It wasn't enough. Not at all. He raised his hand and focused his energy to create a ball of flames. It was like trying to get water out of a rock. The most he got was a tiny wisp of fire that fluttered like a ribbon before snuffing out. Sweat beaded his forehead. That had been painful, to say the least, as if he were ripping his soul apart just trying to summon the power of his inner fire. As if there was nothing left inside him but cold embers. I was afraid that this would happen. Zuko spun around to see his uncle standing in the doorway, holding a bowl of congee. His expression was solemn. This is the reason you got chi deficiency the last time, isn't it? Iroh said. You had just healed the Avatar. Zuko let his hand drop back to his side. Yes. Well, then sunlight should return your bending to normal. I guess. There was an awkward silence. In the past, his uncle would have been able to fill that pause with one of his silly, genial comments and the moment would have passed. Now the tension just lingered, uncomfortable and whispering of unspoken words. Zuko's hands trembled. He turned the other way. It doesn't matter now. What's done is done. I'm just glad you're. Don't be foolish. For the first time, Iroh sounded genuinely frustrated. I appreciate what you did for me, nephew, but healing my wound caused you to go unconscious for several hours and has significantly weakened your bending. This isn't something you can just brush aside. What was I supposed to do? You had been struck with lightning. You weren't moving. I could barely feel your heartbeat and you panicked. I know. I'm sorry I put you in that situation. I should have known better than to let my guard down. It is a mistake I will always regret, especially since I caused you so much pain. Zuko swallowed. I don't care about that. I just wanted you to be well. Even if it still hurt to think that Iroh had abandoned him. Even if a part of him wondered if he would ever be able to fix the cracks that had splintered through his heart during their separation. Iroh let out a soft breath. Nephew, you don't understand. Every time you heal, you're gambling with your future. The Avatar told me that, thanks to the spiritual connection you share, he could feel your life energy dwindling when you healed me. He shook his head. I know you're reckless, but the risks are too great when it comes to this form of bending. It's likely the intense draining effect is one of the reasons why fire healers were so rare in the past. Most of them probably shied from even using the technique. A frown creased Zuko's brow. What spiritual connection? What are you talking about? He took a step closer. And what do you mean that fire healers were rare in the past? Do you know something about my healing powers? Tell me. It was the whine of a child. Zuko didn't care. He felt like he was coming apart at the seams, as if 1,000 screams of rage and pain were locked up inside him, trying to claw their way out of his chest. Everything had been ripped away from him, his home, his family, his memories, even the good feelings that had made him once trust this man implicitly. He'd tried his best to piece himself back together, to collect all the scattered parts of himself, but it wasn't enough. Nothing made sense anymore. Everything was out of his control. He just wanted some real answers. Zuko took another step forward, curling his fingers into his uncle's tunic. Tell me. Iroh closed his eyes. I don't have all the answers. The only thing I know for certain is that your gift is both extremely rare and dangerous. He closed his hand around the one gripping his tunic and met Zuko's gaze. Promise me that you won't heal anymore. Not until we can find out the truth. Zuko wrenched himself away, almost knocking the bowl of kanji out of his uncle's hands. You sound just like mother. What? Zuko stared down at his shaking hands. She told me to never use my bending for anything other than what my masters taught me. His voice hoarse-ained. She knew. She'd always known. That was why she had Shizue watch me, because she was afraid. A shudder went through his body. They thought I was unnatural. No. Iroh placed the bowl of kanji on the floor and moved closer, clasping Zuko's hands in his own. Your mother loved you, Zuko. She was only trying to protect you. Protect me from what? Zuko exclaimed, feeling the sting of tears burn his eyes. I can heal people with my bending. I healed you. Maybe it does weaken me, but how did she even know that it would have that effect? It doesn't make sense. Iroh shook his head, more helpless than disagreeing. Zuko pulled himself away. His whole body was trembling now. Why doesn't anyone just tell me the truth? He half whispered. I'm so tired of all these lies and secrets. The truth is not an easy burden to carry. Sometimes, it can even destroy us. That is why we, as humans, prefer to look at the shadows on the wall, glimpsing only echoes of what the sun might reveal. I don't want your proverbs. I just want to know the truth. What do you really know about my fire healing? What are you still keeping from me? Iroh spread his hands. I did not come here to hide things from you. Believe me, all I want to do is help, but what? Iroh just stared at him, trying to reason with him in silent words. You are not ready for this, those eyes seemed to say. I don't want to hurt you. Zuko refused to back down. He was done running. Iroh must have sensed his resolve, for he exhaled in a resigned sort of way and sat down on the floor. I did not lie when I said I don't have all the answers. All I know is what has been passed down in the royal family archives, and that is corrupted at best. The rest are just whispers of truth that even time has not been able to destroy. Zuko said nothing. He knelt on the hard floor, staring at his uncle with his hands clenched on his lap. You are a special kind of firebender that were once known as the children of the Undying Fire. Exceptionally rare, but also exceptionally dangerous. What do you mean by dangerous? Iroh shrugged. I'm not sure. All I know is that the royal family swore an oath many centuries ago to destroy the children of the Undying Fire. Something must have happened, something that caused the Fire Nation to unite against the Fire Healers to wipe them out from existence. But why? Zuko licked his dry lips. Why would people want to hurt those like me? I mean, we can heal. I don't know. I wish I did. Iroh shook his head. Too much time has passed since fire healers were an accepted part of our world. The truth has become corroded. Perhaps the fire healers themselves chose to become a lost part of history, sensing that it was the only way they could survive. Either way, it would not be wise for you to broadcast your talents. You never know who might recognize you for what you are. Zuko let out a breath. I still don't understand. Why would fire healers be such a threat? Why would Fire Lord Sozin wipe out an entire nation of airbenders just to end the Avatar cycle? Iroh shook his head. People do terrible things when they feel threatened. No doubt the Fire Lord of that time felt the same way as your great-grandfather. Zuko opened his mouth to argue, to repeat all of the propaganda he had been taught as a child as to why the fight against the air nomads had been justified. Then he thought of the sanctuary hidden beneath the banyan tree. He thought of all those children who had been forced to hide and, in the process, who had lost their bending. He realized that he had stopped believing in those words a long time ago. His shoulders slumped and he stared at the ground. What am I supposed to do? I can't control my healing powers. I don't even know how I trigger them. It just happens. Iroh placed his hand over Zuko's trembling fists. We will figure something out. In the meantime, you just focus on getting plenty of sunlight. You're going to need all of your strength. Zuko's mouth tilted downwards. I know. Azula will be back. It hurt just to think about it. His own sister had viciously attacked them. The little girl who had worried about him when she had seen him climbing on rooftops was no more. In her place was a cold, calculating warrior who would never compromise for the sake of compassion. Just like that day. Don't worry, Zuzu. I just want to see how your fire works. A twinge of pain lanced through his mind. He hissed and rubbed at his temples. Something wrong? Iroh asked, glancing at him in concern. It's just a lingering effect from when I lost my memories. Sometimes, I get sharp pains in my head when a new memory comes back or I can't fully recall something. Iroh's eyes widened. Do you mean to tell me that you are still experiencing amnesia? Zuko gave a helpless shrug. I'm not sure. It feels like there are still bits and pieces of my life missing, but... Arms suddenly pulled him into a warm embrace. I'm so sorry, Zuko. This is my fault. I should have been at your side. I should have been there to protect you. Zuko said nothing. He wanted to pull away from his uncle. He wanted to draw closer. Instead, he just sat there like carved stone. We will fix this, Iroh promised, pulling away to meet his eyes. The young waterbender traveling with the Avatar is a healer. She should be able to heal sicknesses of the mind as well. There may be a way to retrieve all of your memories. Zuko averted his gaze. Maybe. He would never admit it, but a part of him was still afraid. Whatever memories he had yet to recover, he sensed that they were the most wounding, most emotionally damaging parts of his past. If anything was worse than his own father burning and banishing him, he wasn't sure that he really wanted to know. Iroh smiled at him. Trust me, nephew. Everything is going to be all right. Zuko nodded, more because he didn't want to continue the conversation than because he agreed. He was too tired to explain his feelings, too tired to even begin unraveling what he really felt. It was easier to stay silent and go along with what his uncle was saying. His mind was reeling with information and emotions. He needed time to process everything. It was time to change the subject. His gaze settled on the bowl of congee. "Breakfast?" he asked. "Courtesy of Master Katara," Iroh said, handing him the bowl. She was up early preparing food for everyone. A reluctant smile curved Zuko's mouth. That sounded like Katara, always ready to be the mum of the group. She'd even tried to mother him when he had traveled with them as Lee. "Give her my thanks," he said softly. Iroh hauled himself to his feet with a groan. "Tell her yourself. She's just outside cleaning the dishes. I doubt she'd want to talk to me." "Well, you won't know until you try." Iroh smiled. "Give her a chance. Who knows? Perhaps she will surprise you." Zuko just stared at the ground. "Maybe. Maybe not. It's the least you can do," Iroh said gently. "These people reached out to you when you had no one else. Don't be so quick to turn your back on them now just because you've remembered that you're supposed to be enemies." Zuko frowned at his hands. Did he still think they were enemies? Certainly he was upset with the Avatar for all the lies the boy had fed him while he'd had amnesia, but Katara and Sokka. He raised his head, but his uncle had already gone. Frowning, he stared at the open doorway to where he could see a glimpse of the dusty road where he and Azula had fought. If he listened closely, he could hear the sound of wooden bowls clinking together and the faint slosh of water bending. His stomach twisted, even as a sliver of uncertainty slid down his spine. Aang, Sokka, Katara. He had traveled with them as an ally while wearing the mask of the Blue Spirit. It had been easy to talk to them then, back when he had been unaware of his identity. But now there was no mask. Now he was just Zuko, the banished prince of the Fire Nation. Now he didn't know what he wanted, let alone how he was supposed to speak to those he had called his enemies. A sigh escaped his lips. He picked up the wooden spoon and slowly started digging his way into the congee. Katara had prepared the food with her own hands. She had made enough so that he and his uncle would also have a share in the meal. Surely that meant something? Give her a chance. Who knows? Perhaps she will surprise you. Zuko frowned and placed the half-finished bowl aside. He knelt by the pile of clothes on the floor and slipped on the loose, black pants he had been wearing yesterday, though he didn't bother to pull on his boots. Chi deficiency or not, he was not going to wander around in his undergarments. Satisfied that his modesty was still somewhat intact, he picked up the bowl of congee and left the run-down building. The street was quiet, though he could see scorch marks on the road and abandoned houses from the previous day's struggle. Not far from the house where he had rested, he found Katara kneeling by what looked like the remnants of a campfire. A pot and a few dishes were stacked up next to her, along with a bucket of water. His uncle was nowhere to be seen. Zuko hesitated on the porch. She hadn't noticed his presence yet, too busy scrubbing one of the wooden bowls. The pendant hanging around her throat gleamed in the sun, glinting like a sapphire against her skin. Well, at least he understood now why he had recognized her necklace during their retreat from Omashu. After all, he had kept it tied around his wrist, planning to use it as a tool to capture the Avatar. "Don't kid yourself," his inner voice mocked. "This girl isn't going to want to talk to you. Why should she when you still refuse to speak to the Avatar? You think you deserve any better after everything you have done?" Zuko sighed and turned to go back in the house. Suddenly, Katara raised her head and stared straight at him. His eyes widened. Damn, he'd been seen. For a moment, neither of them moved. He swallowed, conscious of the sudden dryness in his throat. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, not sure if he was about to be pushed off or pulled to safety. Every bad thing he had ever done to this girl flashed before his mind: the kidnapping, the attack on her village, the fight in the spirit oasis. On and on it went, twisting his heart into a lump of guilt. However, for all their unhappy history together, he couldn't help but recall the kinder memories they had created back when he'd just been a boy named Lee. He saw a girl trying to teach a masked warrior how to waterbend, a girl healing his bruises and scolding him because he insisted on carrying his burdens without her assistance. A girl who had tried so hard to be his friend. Zuko let out a small breath and walked towards her. I just wanted to say thanks for the food. He held up the bowl of congee. Uncle said you were the one who made it. Katara stared at him with her big, blue eyes. It was like looking into the gaze of the ocean, an endless blue that could swallow him whole or help carry him to shore. He realized that he was nervous. Somehow, for whatever reason, there was a part of him that didn't want her to hate him again. Not after she had cared for him so sincerely when he had worn the mask. Spirits, he was pathetic. She lowered her gaze to the bucket of water near her feet. It's just a bit of congee, she said in a voice that sounded too even to be natural. I would have done that for anyone. Something heavy settled in his stomach. Right. The silence lingered between them, awkward and uncomfortable. Zuko tried not to feel bitter. He knew that he had no right to expect anything from her. After all, she had no ties to him, only a phantom named Lee who didn't actually exist. No doubt Sokka would be the same. Those memories of silly sword fights and a girl with caring hands were nothing more than a passing dream from a life Zuko could not recapture. He exhaled and averted his face. Right, he repeated. Well, I guess I'll just go then. He turned and walked back towards the rundown building. Never mind that the heaviness in his chest seemed to get worse with each step. It was better this way, right? He still had so much he needed to figure out. He didn't have time to be sentimental or worry about what would happen to the little gang who had taken him in as one of their own. Wait. He paused and glanced over his shoulder. She stood up, one hand clutching the pendant at her throat. Did you really have no idea who you were back then? Back when you were traveling with us, I mean. His eyes narrowed. What, you think I was just making it up now that you know who I really am? When she didn't respond, he let out a small laugh, though the sound was devoid of any amusement. Well, I guess it's to be expected. I'm the enemy, right? She lowered her gaze. Aang doesn't seem to think so. He told us all about how you helped him as the Blue Spirit, and that was when you still had your memories. Her brow furrowed. He seems to think that you and Lee aren't all that different. Zuko stared at her curiously. What do you think? She gave a small shrug, still not meeting his gaze. I don't know. You've always hunted us. It's hard for me to believe that you don't have a hidden agenda. For all I know, helping Aang could have just been some elaborate trick to get closer to him so you can capture him later. Zuko was silent for a long moment. You don't need to worry, Katara, he said in a low voice that was almost as empty as his laugh. There is no secret agenda. Not anymore. He turned his back on her. I have no interest in the Avatar. She sucked in a sharp breath, no doubt shocked by his statement. Is that true? She demanded. My sole purpose for capturing the Avatar was to return home. He bowed his head so that his expression was veiled in shadow. There's not much point doing that when I have nothing to go back to. Without waiting for a response, he quickened his pace and retreated into the rundown building. His own words replayed in his mind, a revelation that even he had not expected. Somehow, somewhere, he had given up on catching the Avatar. He had given up on returning home. Zuko leaned against the wall, letting his head rest against the wood with a dull thud. There was no relief in the realization that he could stop hunting the Avatar. He didn't feel like a burden had been lifted or that he had been liberated from the chains of filial duty. If anything, he just felt empty. 3 years. 3 years of hunting and searching and hoping. And now there was nothing. Zuko had never felt more lost. Maybe it was because there was a part of him that sensed the truth. He remembered reading a silly story once about a man named Bone who accidentally broke the Fire Lord's favorite vase. Bone, fearing for his life, had tried his best to put the shattered pieces of porcelain back together so that the Fire Lord would not notice. He even enlisted the help of famous artisans, but it was no use. The cracks, however minuscule, had still shown through in the repaired vase. Right now, Zuko felt like that vase. Sure, he had pieced his memories back together, but he was not the same person who had first set out to capture the Avatar. Part of that was the Avatar's fault, always so desperate to be his friend. However, the real damage had been done when he'd got amnesia. Becoming Lee had broken him in a way that could not be repaired. Not perfectly. He had lost something integral in the process, something that had once kept his drive to capture the Avatar and return home a burning obsession. It was a sad, empty truth. Not even a decision, really. He'd just stopped believing in his own justifications that there was a reason for him to return. Confronting Angela had only aggravated the problem. Zuko slid to the ground and buried his face against his knees. Everything just seemed to be spiraling further and further out of his control. He thought that getting his memories back would make his path clearer, but his future seemed murkier than ever. Even reuniting with his uncle had left him aching and confused. It seemed like no matter which way he turned, he just hit another wall. What was he supposed to do? What was he supposed to do? There seemed to be no path he could take. He was trapped between his own fractured identities, wondering who he was supposed to be and where he was supposed to go. A banished prince, a sword-wielding vigilante, a boy named Lee. He had been all of these people, but none of them could show him the path to take now. They were just shadows from his past. What he needed was a way to move forward. He clenched his hands into fists. Damn it, he cursed softly. He didn't know where to begin. He was so tired. Chapter 16, The Head-On Approach. Aang hugged his knees to his chest and looked out across the valley where he had been practicing earthbending with Toph. The whole morning had been one of failure after failure. Even now, he wasn't sure if he had what it took to be an earthbender. There's no different angle, no clever solution, no trick-kitty trick that's going to move that rock. You've got to face it head-on. His heart clenched and he tightened his grip on his knees. It was strange. He knew Toph had just been giving him tips to earthbend, yet in that moment he had felt like she was talking about more than moving rocks. All of his current problems had started from a single weakness: he didn't like dealing with conflict. In fact, he didn't like confronting anything unpleasant, preferring to evade the issue altogether. He'd even run away from his Avatar responsibilities, upset at the thought of being forced to leave Monk Gyatso. That choice had resulted in him being frozen in an iceberg for 100 years. In the end, he'd lost not only Gyatso but all of the air nomads. Was the same thing about to happen with Zuko? There you are. Aang glanced up and saw Katara approaching. His chest tightened. Their interactions had been a bit strained ever since he'd told her the truth about the blue spirit. Then he noticed the corners of her mouth were turned up a fraction and she was holding 2 peaches. Some of the tension eased from his body. That was not the expression of a person who was mad. Thought you might be hungry, she said, sitting down next to him and offering him one of the peaches. Aang relaxed even more, reassured by the warmth in her voice. Thanks. He took the peach and bit into it. Sweet juices filled his mouth, but it still felt like he was chewing on fabric. He took another bite. Absent as the act of eating was, at least it gave him a distraction. Can I ask you something? He asked after a moment. Sure. What made you forgive me? He flushed and cast a panicked look at her face. That is, if you have forgiven me. A rueful smile curved her lips. I don't know if I intended to do it. I guess it just happened. His brow creased. But why? I mean, I lied to you about the blue spirit's identity, and you were so angry before, but now you're just, he made a vague gesture with his arms, well, being nice to me again. Katara frowned and rubbed her cheek. I guess I just find it hard to stay mad at you. Aang resisted the urge to pout. That wasn't going to help him. Zuko seemed to have a talent for staying grumpy with everyone. Katara must have sensed that he wasn't satisfied with her response, because she sighed and spread her hands in a helpless gesture. I don't know, Aang. You really did upset me when you kept the truth about Zuko from us for all that time. To be honest, I was furious. But you're still my friend. No matter how betrayed I felt, I guess I just couldn't keep holding it against you. That doesn't change the fact that what you did was wrong, but listening to you talk yesterday made me realize that you were also just scared and confused. I think in some twisted kind of way you thought you were doing the right thing by lying. I don't even know anymore, he admitted. I was scared and I was confused. Zuko had lost his memories, and I had no idea if I would make things worse by telling him who he was, let alone how you and Sokka would react if you knew his identity. He sighed. I really regret not being honest now. I know, she said softly. Maybe that's why it was so easy for me to forgive you. I saw that you were hurting. Aang's shoulders slumped. Yeah, but that isn't going to help me with Zuko. He hates me more than ever. He won't even speak to me. Katara made a thoughtful noise. I spoke to him this morning. He seemed different. What do you mean? Well, he said he had given up on capturing you. Aang blinked. He said that? But that was the only way he could go home. He told me so himself. She frowned. He said that there was no point hunting you if there was no longer any reason for him to return home. Aang chewed on his lip. Zuko had always been so adamant about returning to the Fire Nation. What could have happened to make him change his mind? Not that Aang could say he wasn't relieved being hunted by the guy he wanted to be friends with wasn't exactly an ideal situation, but a part of him couldn't help feeling concerned all the same. Zuko didn't seem the type to just give up, even if he had realized that the Fire Nation was bad and that he shouldn't be listening to such a horrible Fire Lord. I don't get it, Aang said at last, but if he's no longer trying to capture me, that can only be a good thing. Katara nodded in agreement. Aang suddenly grinned at her. But that's great he talked to you. I mean, he normally never opens up about himself. Maybe he does still want to be our friend. He paused, upturned lips drooping. Well, you and Sokka's friend. She scratched her cheek. I don't know if I would have called that a friendly conversation. It was more awkward than anything. Yeah, but he still spoke to you. He just avoids me. She sighed and straightened her shoulders, seeming to come to a decision. If being Zuko's friend means that much to you, then I think you know what you need to do. As he stared into her eyes, he could hear Topha's voice echoing in his mind. You've got to stop thinking like an airbender. There's no different angle, no clever solution, no trick-kitty trick that's going to move that rock. You've got to face it head on. He let out a small breath. I guess you're right. Katara smiled and went back to eating her peach. He took another bite of his own and relaxed next to her, content to enjoy the silence now that all the tension was gone between them. Still, he knew he'd just got lucky with Katara. She had forgiven him with little effort on his part, but Zuko would not be the same. Aang had to find his courage. Somehow, he had to learn to face Zuko head-on. Oh. Zuko had spent most of the day walking around the outskirts of the abandoned town, mindful that he needed to be in the sun but still careful to avoid running into another human. He had wanted to be alone and think. Wandering the rocky ridges and valleys that surrounded Tuzin had seemed like a good plan. His mind felt jumbled, and no amount of soul-searching seemed to clarify matters. He just didn't know what to do. Now I've gotcha. Zuko paused at the sound of the raised voice. That sounded like Sokka. A lop-eared rabbit came darting out from behind the massive boulder in front of him, its eyes big and round with panic and its ears flopping everywhere. His brow creased. A split second later something crashed into Zuko's back, shoving him off balance. He let out a grunt just as there was a sharp and far too familiar yelp in his ear. That idiot Sokka had run straight into him. Gravity kicked in with disastrous speed and the world tilted as both boys fell straight into a narrow crevice. You have got to be kidding me, Zuko muttered. He wriggled and tried to twist free of the rock now encasing him, but it was like pushing against the teeth of a beast that didn't want to let go. Only his head and one hand had managed to stay out of the earth's clutches. However, the hand in question was so cramped up near his face that he could barely move it. Sokka hadn't fared much better. The boy had both hands free, also with limited movement, but was otherwise trapped from the neck down. Worse, he and Sokka were way too close. A whole side of their bodies were squashed up against each other like octo sardines trying to cram into the same, tiny space. It was a level of snugness Zuko could have done without. There goes dinner, Sokka said mournfully, watching the lop-eared rabbit hop off into the distance. Are you serious? You just got us stuck in this stupid hunk of rock and you're still worrying about your dinner. But it's meat. Zuko said, in a very impolite way that his mother would have frowned upon, exactly what Sokka could do with his meat. Instead of responding in kind, Sokka just heaved a big sigh and began trying to squeeze himself free. And tried. And tried. He sighed again and let his head slump. This sucks, Sokka declared. You think? Sokka pursed his lips. There's no need to get snippy. It's not like I meant for us to get stuck in here. Besides, you were the one who got in my way. What? You ran into me. I was hunting. Then maybe you should have looked where you were going. Isn't that how hunting works? Or do you go around trying to catch things with your eyes closed? Sokka raised his chin. I'll have you know that. I don't care. Zuko would have snarled flames if his bending was at its usual strength. The fact is we're stuck in this hole now. Sokka had no response for that. There was a long, awkward pause as both boys avoided speaking or even looking at each other. Zuko glowered at the rocks while Sokka let out little sighs and continued to wriggle futilely. My toe is itchy, Sokka complained after a while. Zuko said nothing. Man, now my leg is itchy. A vein twitched on Zuko's forehead. Ugh, now my neck is itchy. Zuko swiveled his head to glare at him. I get it. I think the whole world gets it that you're itchy. Sokka raised his eyebrows. Sheesh. Someone's touchy today. Guess getting your memories back really did turn you into an angry jerk again. Zuko closed his eyes in a pained manner. Spirits grant him patience. There was another long pause. So, hey, Sokka said. I've been wondering, do you still remember what you did and stuff while you were going around as Lee? Why? Just curious. You lost all your memories, right? I just wondered if it would do a clean slate thing when you got them back. Zuko shook his head. I remember everything. A grin curved Sokka's mouth. Excellent. Why is that excellent? The grin widened. Because we both know I got you good with my boomerang. He let out a laugh. Oh, and there was the time when Katara thought you were a waterbender and got you to try making water move. It's pretty funny when I think about it now. You were all. Zuko stretched to grab the loose pebble that was just within his reach. He threw it as hard as his cramped hand would allow. It bounced off Sokka's forehead with a thwack. Ow. Sokka's grin vanished in an instant. What was that for? Because you're an idiot. A cocky gleam entered Sokka's eyes. Oh, I get it. You're just bitter because I got the better of you with boomerang. I'm really not. Sure. Don't worry, not everyone has the skills to avoid my trusty boomerang. Zuko gritted his teeth. Let's get one thing straight, you might have taken me off guard with that weapon of yours, but whether I fight with my bending or not, you're still no match for me. Boastful much. It's not boasting when it's the truth. Zuko raised his one good eyebrow. Or have you forgotten how easily I bested you with my swords? Hey, I was just a bit rusty then. Zuko's expression did not change. Honest, Sokka insisted. I'm normally much better than that. Zuko sighed and looked the other way. Sokka was not content to let the matter drop and informed him that, regardless of how skilled Zuko thought he was with swords, there was no way he would win in a battle of wits. In Sokka's own words, Zuko was currently in the presence of a master of strategies. Great, Zuko said dryly. Then strategize us a way out of this rock. Sokka blinked and scratched his cheek. Right. Maybe we should call for help. Zuko exhaled loudly. We're going to be stuck here for hours, aren't we? Hey, it's worth a shot. What else do you suggest we do? Since Zuko didn't have any other suggestions, he simply sighed again and began shouting for someone to come to their assistance. Sokka joined him, but the most they managed to do was attract a baby saber-tooth moose lion. Some of the color drained from Zuko's face. This isn't good, he muttered. Meat. Sokka licked his lips. All right, you just wait till I get free, little guy. I'm going to make you dinner. Zuko eyed the small creature warily. Pretty sure you don't want this meat, Sokka. Well, it is awfully cute, but meat is meat. The baby might be cute, but the mother is sure to be close, and I can tell you that she is anything but. What do you mean? Think big, angry, and likes to charge at you with massive horns. Sokka gulped. Oh. Yeah, that doesn't sound so cute. The two boys exchanged a glance and began making motions with their cramped hands to shoo the baby saber-tooth moose lion away. Unfortunately, the creature seemed to take this all as a game and just wagged its tail happily. Then it came closer and started tugging on Sokka's ponytail. Hey, that's my hair. Sokka complained. Suddenly, a blur of orange came rushing towards them. When the wind settled, Aang was kneeling in front of the boys with an anxious expression on his face. The baby saber-tooth moose lion gave up on Sokka's hair and went to sniff the airbender. Are you guys alright? Aang asked. Oh, yeah, Sokka said. Just peachy. Zuko averted his gaze while Aang tried to pull Sokka out from the crevice. Dealing with Sokka had been a test of patience at times, but just looking at the Avatar's childish face with the stupid arrow tattoo made him feel uncomfortable. He didn't want to be there. He didn't want to deal with the conflicting feelings that rattled around inside him. This boy lied to you. He betrayed you. The words echoed in Zuko's head, but there were others as well. Offers of friendship and shy smiles and a desperate plea for Zuko not to hate him. So confusing. So frustrating. I don't know if I can. Aang's voice snapped Zuko from his thoughts. He gathered that Sokka had been trying to get Aang to earthbend them out of the rock since pulling had failed. Apparently, the little blind girl had been teaching the Avatar how to bend her element. If you can't earthbend us out of here, then go get Toph, Sokka grumbled. It shouldn't be a problem for her. Aang cast a panicked glance at Zuko and then stared down at his feet, chewing on his bottom lip. He didn't get a chance to respond, though. A thudding of hooves from behind alerted them to the presence of the baby saber-tooth moose lion's mother. The beast snorted and pawed at the ground, mouth curling to reveal large teeth that could easily snap a human in two. You're right, Zuko, Sokka said with a faint tremble. Mama is not so cute. His gaze darted to Aang. Now would be a good time to get us out of here. In typical Aang fashion, he tried to talk with the mother and claimed they were friendly. Too bad the saber-tooth moose lion decided that was her cue to charge. All Zuko and Sokka could do was watch as the airbender was forced to protect them from being crushed to death. It was humiliating but also kind of terrifying. There was a point where Zuko was sure they were going to get trampled, but Aang, for once, stood his ground and blasted the giant creature back with a huge gust of wind. The saber-tooth moose lion skulked away with its baby. Someone began a slow clap. Zuko turned his head to see Toph lounging on a boulder with what looked like Aang's staff. It turned out the little brat had been there the whole time. When Aang demanded to know why she hadn't helped, she shrugged and said it hadn't occurred to her before proceeding to try cracking a nut open with his staff. The fact she then taunted Aang into earthbending didn't mean much either. Zuko held back a sigh. Would you just get us out of here already, earthbender? Her head whipped towards him. Who are you calling earthbender, Moody Pants? Moody what? Toph ignored his interjection and thumped her hand against her chest. The name's Toph, and don't you forget it. Zuko rolled his eyes. Fortunately, Toph didn't expect a reply. She stomped her foot against the ground and forced them both with her bending to come up from the crevice. Zuko, while covered in scrapes and aching in a way that suggested he would have a lot of bruises, was otherwise unscathed. Sokka was not so lucky. He put his weight on his left foot and crumpled. I think I sprained my ankle, Sokka groaned. Aang smiled and helped him to stand. Katara can probably help with that. Let's head back. The four made their way towards the village and all the dusty streets and broken down houses. Eventually, they found Katara talking with Iroh as the two of them prepared what Zuko assumed would be tonight's dinner. There was a pot of rice bubbling away and Iroh was slicing a stack of fruit into fine quarters with a knife. Katara noticed them first and took one look at Sokka, who was limping and struggling to stay on his feet even with Aang's support, and then she was on her feet and running to pull her brother into a tight hug. You're hurt, she exclaimed, holding him even closer. What happened? Zuko's heart gave an odd twist, like a phantom echo of a wound he had never known existed. He averted his gaze from the siblings, finding it difficult to watch them show such open affection for each other. It was a painful reminder of how his own sister had done nothing but seek to hurt him, even kill him. Angela would never try to be close to him like that. It's okay to be scared, Angela. I'm not scared. I just can't sleep with all of this stupid thunder making so much noise, and if I have to stay awake then so do you. He smiled and wrapped his arm around her, pulling her into a loose embrace. She hesitated only a moment before leaning into him, trying not to flinch when another rumble of thunder shook the palace walls. I'm not scared, she repeated fiercely. I know, he murmured, resting his head against hers. I just figured you might be cold. She hid her face against his shoulder. Dum-dum. He didn't need to see her expression to know she was smiling. Zuko winced as pain lanced through his mind. No. He didn't want this memory. He didn't want to remember those feelings of brotherly fondness. Angela had hurt him. She had hurt him and hurt him and hurt him, and he couldn't. A hand gripped his shoulder, anchoring him back to reality. Nephew. Zuko's vision cleared into dizzying focus. Iroh was staring at him in concern, puzzled as to why he had started showing signs of distress. Zuko exhaled a bit shakily and stepped away. It's nothing, he stammered. I just... Hey, Katara, look what I can do. Zuko and Iroh both turned as Aang shoved his arms forward in a fierce gesture, causing a large rock formation to break in half. You did it. Katara said proudly. I knew you would. Aang blushed and rubbed the base of his neck. Zuko didn't understand why the Avatar kept glancing his way with a shy smile as if there was some special significance to the fact that he had finally managed to earthbend. Did he expect a round of applause or something? Whatever. Zuko walked away from the group. I'm going back to the house. Wait. Iroh's hand once more gripped his shoulder, turning him back around so that he had no choice but to look at his uncle. Zuko, please tell me what's wrong, Iroh said, soft enough so that only he could hear. I can see that you're hurting, and though I swore to myself that I would let you figure out what you wanted to do on your own, I can't just stand by idly and watch you suffer either. His grip tightened. Please, let me help you. You don't have to carry all of these burdens on your own. Zuko slipped free of the warm grip that promised so much comfort yet only seemed to hurt him even more. It's nothing, he said in a hollow voice. Forget about it. Was it the memories again? Zuko stilled. You said you get sharp pains when a memory resurfaces, and I noticed you were clutching your head before. Iroh moved closer. Zuko, there is a waterbending master right there. We could ask her to. No. The word was wrenched out of Zuko before he could stop it. Iroh blinked, shocked by the vehemence of the response. I mean. Zuko swallowed against the building pressure in his chest. I already have the important memories now. I know who I am, and I know about my past, so it's not like it really matters anymore if there are a few still missing. Iroh gave him a shrewd look. Is that really what you think? Yes. No. Zuko didn't know. All he knew was that he could taste the panic on his tongue, reminding him of what he had glimpsed only a few minutes ago, Angela as a young girl crawling up onto his bed and letting him comfort her with a hug because she was scared of the thunder. The one thing that could hurt him more than her lies or the wounds she had inflicted upon him ever could, because it was undeniable proof that she had cared. That he had cared. Maybe still did. Zuko clenched his hands into fists. I just want to be alone, he muttered. Iroh looked like he was going to protest, but Zuko didn't wait around to listen. He hurried away as fast as his legs could carry him, only slowing his pace once he got back to the abandoned house where he had first awoken. He walked inside and sat on the blankets, sighing as he ran a hand through his hair. No relief. No comfort. Still just that desperate question echoing over and over in his mind, what was he supposed to do? Never give up without a fight. Zuko bowed his head almost in resignation. Maybe that was the problem. It wasn't in his nature to run, but he knew, deep down, that he had been running. Running from his memories, running from his uncle, running from the Avatar. Running from anything that could hurt him. It's okay to be scared, Angela. He closed his eyes. The memory replayed in his mind, so wounding in its innocence. There was a part of him that still wished he could erase it entirely. He wouldn't have to hurt so much then. He'd be able to move on with his life. However, he had also realized that the more he tried to block those tender images, the more that horrible emptiness seemed to grow inside him, gnawing away at his heart like some all-consuming black hole. What if the emptiness never stopped? Would he lose himself entirely? Would he stay like the Fire Lord's vase, just a broken shell of what he used to be? A soft knock shattered him from his brooding. "Go away, uncle," Zuko growled, clutching his knees to his chest and looking the other way. It's me." The shy, hesitant voice made Zuko repress a sigh. Didn't that kid ever just drop it? "What do you want, Avatar?" Zuko had meant the question to come out as a brusque demand. Instead, his tone just sounded tired. Tired and lost. Aang stepped into the house. The creaking of the floorboards told him that Aang had come to sit next to him. A glance to the side confirmed his suspicions. The Avatar sat cross-legged, not facing him directly. Instead, the two of them sat side by side, each staring down at their hands. "Katara told me that you don't want to capture me anymore," Aang said after a moment. Zuko remained silent. He did not want to be having this conversation. "I don't know why you changed your mind, but I guess I just wanted to say thanks. I know how much you wanted to go home." A lump formed in Zuko's throat. He swallowed and closed his eyes. There was a long silence that followed, which neither of them tried to fill. Zuko wished the boy would just go away. "Listen, Zuko, Enough," he said softly, though his voice sounded a bit hoarse. "But I've told you countless times that I don't want to speak to you, yet you just keep coming back." Zuko raised his head and glared at him. "Can't you see that I want nothing to do with you?" Aang gave a sad smile. "I know you don't. I know you hate me and probably wish I was far away from you." He sighed and glanced back at his hands. "Who could blame you? I lied and tried to keep your identity from you because I was scared. I used the spirits and the power of the Avatar state to kill your people in the North Pole even though there was no way they could have defended themselves." His mouth trembled. "You were right. I acted like a monster that night, and I hate it. I hate thinking about it and all the other selfish, stupid things I've done, but don't you see? I can't change any of that now. Even if I wanted to, I can't take it back. So what? You think I should just forgive you? You think because of this stupid connection you seem to believe we have that you can just apologize and it's all okay?" He had not forgotten what his uncle had said. The Avatar thought they had a spiritual connection. Somehow, that was even more frustrating. Didn't anyone understand that he wanted nothing to do with the kid? "I just want you to give me a chance," Aang said earnestly. "That's all I'm asking for. Just a chance to prove that I can be a better Avatar, but also a better friend. I don't want to be your friend." The words sounded petty even to Zuko's ears, but Aang just smiled that sad, little smile. "I know," he acknowledged, "but I really do want to be your friend. At least if you'll let me." Zuko said nothing. Aang must have sensed that he wasn't going to get anything more out of him because he got back to his feet. "I'm not going to push you. It's your choice to forgive me or not, but I hope you know that I do regret what I did." He shifted on his feet and rubbed the base of his neck. "And, if you and your uncle need a ride anywhere, you know that there's always room for you on Appa." Having said his piece, Aang bowed deeply and then flashed one last smile before leaving the house. Zuko stared at the doorway with a conflicted expression on his face. It was a long time before he moved. Chapter 17, Decision. "Do you think Zuko will come out soon?" Aang asked, glancing in the direction of the abandoned house. There was a collective sigh from Katara and Sokka. This wasn't the first time he had asked the question. Toph just rolled her eyes and stuffed rice into her mouth. It seemed she was not going to acknowledge Aang with a response. Not that it would have helped him much if she had. The Earthbender was a fan of tough love and would have been more likely to tell him to suck it up and to stop being such a baby than to offer any comfort. Katara removed her glowing hands from Sokka's ankle. She bent the water back into her flask and turned to face Aang. You're the one who said you couldn't force Zuko to be your friend. Just be patient. Yeah, but... Look, Aang, Sokka said, even as he wiggled his ankle around to test for any lingering pain. Satisfied that Katara really had healed the sprain, he put his foot down and gave Aang his full attention. If Prince Broody Pants wants to shut himself up in that house all broodily, then let him. You've said your piece, right? Then there's nothing more you can do. He raised his finger to the air like some great philosopher. Besides, if there's one thing I've learned while hunting, it's that you don't want to jump the paddle to catch your prey. You've got to be smart and give them enough space to lull them into a false sense of security so they'll lower their guard. That's when you can make your move. Aang's brow creased. I'm just trying to be his friend, Sokka. It's not like I want to trap Zuko in a cage and poke him with pointy sticks. Katara placed her palm against her forehead. Honestly, Sokka. Hey. Sokka said, folding his arms across his chest. I'm just saying that Aang shouldn't rush the guy. Look, I might not trust Zuko, but he still helped us out when he traveled with us as Lee, and it's obvious he's dealing with a lot of baggage. A shrug. If Zuko wants to be alone, let him. You'll only make things worse if you keep prodding and pushing. Aang stared at the half-finished bowl of rice on his lap. I guess. Sokka is right, a deep voice said from behind Aang. Aang stood up, almost dropping the bowl. General Iroh. Just Iroh is fine. He held up a steaming teapot. I thought I'd make us some tea. Aang bit his lip. He didn't care about tea just then, he wanted to know what Iroh had meant, but Iroh was already unearthing 5 wooden cups and pouring tea for each of them, refusing to be rushed. This was a man who went at his own pace. For Aang, it was like being stuck with the monks all over again, same aura of wisdom, same lamentable need to focus on what Aang deemed mundane tasks when there were other, more important things to worry about. It hurt in a dull, aching kind of way because all of the air nomads were dead, but it was also calming. Aang found himself instinctively responding to the familiar presence. He lost some of the tension in his muscles, and he even managed to accept his own cup of tea with a murmured thanks. You're welcome, Iroh said, and then settled down on the ground next to Toph. Now then, what has my nephew done to get you so worried? Aang frowned and recounted the conversation he'd had with Zuko. It was rather convoluted, for Aang had a tendency to ramble, but Iroh still managed to get the gist of what had happened. Namely, that Aang had apologized and once more offered friendship, but that he had been swiftly rebuffed. I just don't know if he's ever going to forgive me, Aang said fretfully. I mean, I want to believe that we can be friends, but Zuko just gets angry at me all the time. Like, all the time. He sighed and let his shoulders slump. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Iroh stroked his beard. I don't know if you are doing anything wrong. What? Aang blinked a few times. But Zuko always gets grumpy at me when I try to approach him and... Avatar Aang, Iroh said gently, it is not hate that makes my nephew lash out at you. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Aang's eyes widened. Really? But how do you know? Iroh's mouth curved into a sad smile. Because he has been doing the same thing to me for 3 years. There was a pause as the 4 members of Iroh's audience digested this information. What a brat, Toph said bluntly. Perhaps, Iroh admitted, but a wounded lion pup will often bite the hand that tries to show it kindness. Aang scratched his cheek. I'm not sure I follow. The wrinkles on Iroh's face seemed to deepen like the gnarled grooves of a tree. My nephew has been grossly mistreated. Worse, he was hurt by those who should have cared for him most. Iroh shook his head, more self-deprecating than apologetic. I'm ashamed to admit I did not notice until it was too late. Zuko had always been such a sweet, loyal child, but then Oze. There was a pause as Iroh struggled to articulate his thoughts. His eyes narrowed and his fingers tightened around the cup in his hands. Aang could have sworn he saw smoke rise from the wood. What did the Fire Lord do? Katara asked in a hushed voice. Iroh blinked out of whatever nightmarish memory had held him captive, though a sorrowful gleam remained in his eyes. Let's just say that I will never forgive my brother for what he did to Zuko on that day. It was an act of the deepest cruelty, and it wounded Zuko in more ways than one. No one seemed to know what to say after that. Aang just felt sad. He wanted to go right back into the house and give the prince a big hug. Hugs made everyone feel better, but Zuko was a prickly cactus who would probably just push him away again. It was frustrating. All Aang wanted was to be Zuko's friend. He didn't understand why Zuko had to be so stubborn. Iroh must have sensed his thoughts, because he reached out and placed his hand on Aang's shoulder. "There is a reason why I'm telling you this, young Avatar," Iroh said. "You need to understand that Zuko has grown up in an environment where it was not safe for him to express his rage or his pain. The fact that he does open up to you, however harshly, suggests that he feels more positively towards you than you might think. You could almost call it an act of trust." "An act of trust?" Aang scrunched his nose. "I don't know. I mean, I did lie to him, and he definitely wasn't happy with me when I fused with the ocean spirit. I don't think he trusts me much at all." "This is a different kind of trust," Iroh explained, removing his hand from Aang's shoulder. "Yes, you've lied to him and have given him genuine cause to be upset with you, but you have also apologized for those actions and have tried to befriend him not once but several times. These continuous acts to reach out to him are the key. It is very common for those in his situation to lash out at those who are kind to them rather than the ones who actually hurt them. This is because, on a subconscious level, they feel safe in knowing that the recipient of their anger will not punish or abandon them." Iroh gave a rueful smile. "Though I admit it is not always an easy honor to bear." Sokka leaned forward. "So, you're saying that Zuko turns into a big jerk around Aang because he actually trusts the little guy in some weird kind of way? Whether Zuko wants to admit it or not, young Avatar, he feels safe with you. I don't know how you managed to convince him thus, but believe me when I say that my nephew would not have opened up to you as he has done if he truly hated you." Aang let out a small breath. Zuko felt safe with him? Then it really wasn't hate that made him lash out? A smile crept across Aang's face, though it faded a second later. For all that it was nice to know that Zuko didn't actually want to burn him to a crisp, that didn't change the fact that Zuko was unhappy. A wounded lion pup, Iroh had called him. Someone who didn't know how to express his pain in a healthy way or even ask for comfort. "Isn't there anything we can do?" Aang asked, tightening his grip on the cooling teacup. "I mean, is Zuko always going to be like this?" Iroh sighed and stared in the direction of the abandoned house. "I wish I could say. His anger is real, as is the hurt that has caused him to become so shut off from others. You will have to be patient if you want him to respond positively to you again." Iroh glanced back at Aang, and a warm smile touched his lips. "But I hope that you will keep trying. My nephew is very lucky to have made a friend like you." Aang rubbed the base of his neck. "I just did what I wanted to do." "I know," Iroh said. "That's why he's lucky." Aang frowned, saddened by the comment that should have been a compliment. It sounded like Zuko had never got much support from others before. That just made Aang feel even worse for lying when Zuko had amnesia. He'd been so selfish, thinking only of himself instead of Zuko's feelings. Even the girls were subdued. Katara clutched her pendant and stared at the flames with a distant expression on her face, while Toph just sat a bit awkwardly as if she had stumbled into something private that she hadn't wanted to witness and now wasn't sure what to do with the information. "Aang," Sokka said in a grim voice, "what will you do if Zuko doesn't want to come with us?" There was a tense silence as the full magnitude of those words settled over the group. Aang was the Avatar. He couldn't afford to delay his mission, not even to win over a stubborn prince, or at least that seemed to be what Sokka was implying. No doubt the others felt the same. The thought was heartbreaking. "I'll try speaking to him," Iroh offered, perhaps sensing Aang's distress. "It wouldn't be wise for any of us to linger in this area with Princess Azula so close. I'm sure I can get Zuko to see reason." Aang managed a smile. "Thank you." Oh. It was dark in the abandoned house. Zuko sat hunched on the ground, legs pulled against his chest. He couldn't even conjure a flame to give himself light. His bending was weak and fragile, barely able to produce sparks. The healing ability that had saved two people's lives was indeed a double-edged sword. Rare and dangerous, his uncle had called it. Not that Zuko regretted healing his uncle, he didn't even regret healing the Avatar. He just regretted that it had come to this. There he was, a prince, hiding in a run-down house in some abandoned Earth Kingdom village, just like some vagabond. He was so pathetic. There was a knock at the door. Zuko frowned at the battered screen. His eyes narrowed as another knock followed. If that little bald kid was back again. Nephew. Something got lodged in Zuko's throat. He swallowed and shifted into a more dignified position, not surprised when his uncle entered the room without being invited. Iroh had always disregarded those courtesies when they had traveled together on the ship. "I brought you some tea," Iroh said by way of greeting, then frowned. "Well, perhaps we should have some light first, HRM. He placed the teapot and cups on the ground and created a ball of fire. The flames hovered above his palm for a moment before he used his bending to guide the ball to the fire pit where it took root in the partially charred wood that had been left over from the previous night. The fire grew and burned in orange flickers, lighting the room with a soft glow. Iroh smiled in satisfaction and knelt to pick up the teapot and one of the cups. "I don't want any tea," Zuko mumbled, averting his face so that he was staring at the wall. "Are you sure? It's ginseng." Zuko rolled his eyes. "That's your favorite, uncle. I don't care what flavor it is." Iroh chuckled. "So it is, but perhaps you can humor an old man and drink it anyway. You never know, it might actually make you feel better. Clear some of those cobwebs in your mind." Zuko muttered something about cobwebs and stupid old man, but he still accepted the cup. There were some battles that weren't worth fighting. Refusing his uncle's favorite blend of tea was one of them. Besides, there was a small part of him, just a tiny part, that wanted to drink tea with his uncle and pretend that everything was okay. It would be just like it was when they had traveled together with rest of the crew, back when the ship had still sailed and there were no icy prisons to tear them apart. Iroh sat opposite Zuko and settled into a cross-legged position. He took his time as he poured himself a fresh cup of tea and tasted a small sip. "Ah," he said, closing his eyes. "That is good tea." Zuko said nothing. He just frowned at the cup in his hands, watching the steam rise in a spiraling, hot mist. He regretted accepting the tea now. His heart felt heavy and like it had sunk somewhere into the emptiness that gnawed at his insides. Sitting here like this was just making him feel worse. It was a reminder of how much had changed since his ship had been destroyed. Even drinking tea with his uncle left a bitter taste, as if he were sipping liquid-flavored ashes instead of herbs. "I heard that you have stopped hunting the Avatar." The words were spoken in a neutral voice, but they pierced Zuko to the core, stirring up the hurt and anger that festered under the surface of his deadened emotions. So, his uncle and the others had been talking about him. "Well, it's nice to know you're all getting along so well," Zuko said, placing his tea aside. He didn't even want to look at the cup now. "Did you discuss anything else, or were you too busy having a nice gossip session about me?" Iroh frowned and placed his cup on the floor. "They're just worried about you. The Avatar especially." Zuko tensed. He was well aware of how the Avatar felt about him. It was the reason he felt so upside down and conflicted whenever he saw the kid. "I'm worried about you as well," Iroh said gently. "You've been so distant, always shutting yourself away and going off on your own. It took speaking to those children to learn that you'd chosen not to capture the Avatar, and while I will naturally support you in that decision, I can also see that you are far from happy." He reached out and placed his hand on Zuko's knee. "Please, tell me what's wrong. I can't help you if you don't talk to me." Zuko withdrew his leg from the warm touch. "There's nothing to talk about." Iroh didn't look pleased by the response. If anything, the creases of worry had only deepened on his brow. "Forgive me, nephew, but I think there is a lot we need to talk about. You spent 3 years chasing the Avatar because you wanted to return home. Whatever it was that changed your mind is obviously upsetting you. Add in the fact that you're still recovering from amnesia and the draining effects of your healing abilities, and it's no wonder you're struggling." "I'm fine. I'm just tired and—" "Zuko, please stop lying to me." The words were spoken gently yet firmly. Zuko bowed his head, swallowing against the sudden lump in his throat. "I'm not such an old fool that I can't see when my nephew is hurting. I meant what I said earlier, I will not stand by idly and let you suffer. He placed his hand against Zuko's cheek, raising his chin so that their eyes met. Please, don't make this harder for yourself. I am here for you. Lean on me. Let me share your burdens. A tender smile. There is no shame in admitting you need help. For a moment they just stared at each other. Then Zuko inhaled a shaky breath and pulled away. He stood up and turned his back on his uncle, closing himself off like a hermit crab retreating into its shell. I want to be alone. The words were barely audible. Iroh seemed to take the muted tone as a sign that it was okay to ignore the request, because he got to his feet and reached out to touch Zuko's arm. Nephew, you don't have to keep pushing me away. I'm telling you that I can help you. Why do you insist on being so stubborn? Zuko closed his eyes. He couldn't handle this right now. Not when everything about the situation was just reminding him that his uncle had not been there for him. Zuko. What do you want me to say? He growled, swinging back to face the older man. You were the one who left me at the Northern Water Tribe. I was threatened and hurt and left to rot in that prison of ice, and the only reason I got free was because a waterbender took pity on me. A deadly hush. Iroh looked as if he had been slapped. Not that Zuko got any satisfaction from the expression. All he could do was let out a trembling breath, his chest tight and his throat burning. You just left me, Zuko repeated, balling his hands into fists and feeling something hot prickle in the corner of his eyes. You promised that you would always be there, and you just left. Just like his voice cracked just like Mum. Iroh took one look at those overbright eyes and pulled Zuko tightly into his arms. Zuko tried to break free, but it was like the arms that held him had become bars of iron. He could not break free of that hold, he wasn't even sure if he really wanted to break free. The scent of herbs that always seemed to linger around his uncle was so familiar, so soothing. Memories of happier times washed over him, drinking tea on a rusty old ship, bickering, so much bickering but also laughter. They had spent 3 years together on that boat, and though his uncle had aggravated him with all his trivial talk and nagging, Zuko had also seen the old man as the only constant thing in his upside-down life. Everything else had changed, but his uncle had still been there. And then he suddenly wasn't. Why did you leave? Zuko choked out, burying his face into Iroh's shoulder. Why does everyone always have to leave? Iroh's arms tightened around him. Zuko. That one word, uttered almost as a sigh, was the undoing of him. Something wet trailed down his cheeks, followed by another and another. He clutched at his uncle's tunic and trembled with suppressed sobs, trying so desperately to be strong, yet unable to stop the tears from flowing. His chest burned, his throat burned, everything was burning. He couldn't stop. The tears kept on coming, and his body shuddered, and he just couldn't stop crying. He couldn't even remember the last time he had cried like this. It was like a dam had been broken, letting all the hurt and feelings of abandonment gush out in a big, ugly mess. SHH, Iroh said, rubbing gentle circles on his back with his hand. It's okay, Zuko. Just let it out. Zuko shook his head, still keeping his face hidden against his uncle's tunic. He wanted to tell Iroh that it wasn't okay, because everything was so messed up now and he shouldn't be showing such weakness, but all that came out was a half-choked sob. Iroh's only response was to clutch him tighter. Don't be afraid to cry, Iroh murmured in his ear. Even the greatest of warriors must shed tears in time of pain. Zuko squeezed his eyes shut, letting fresh tears roll down his cheeks. I looked everywhere for you, he said in a small voice, a voice so small and vulnerable that it barely sounded like him. I know, Iroh said soothingly, still rubbing circles on his back. I'm sorry I made you wait. I came as fast as I could. That did it. If the dam had been broken before, it was an overflow of emotion now. Zuko dug his fingers into the coarse fabric of his uncle's tunic, crying openly as feelings he had suppressed for too long forced their way out of his body. Somehow, the two of them ended up kneeling on the ground while Iroh just held him, telling him over and over that it was going to be all right. Everything was going to fine. You don't have to be alone anymore, Iroh said, cradling him against his chest. I'm here for you now, and I'm not going anywhere. Zuko hiccuped on a sob. How can I trust you? Everyone always leaves me. But I won't, Iroh repeated firmly. I told you once before that I think of you as my own son. That hasn't changed, Zuko. Zuko raised his head to stare at his uncle through tear-blurred eyes. There was no lie in the warm smile that curved his uncle's lips, nor was there any hint of deception in that loving gaze. His uncle cared for him like a son. With utter sincerity, Iroh had promised that he would not abandon him again. Such a declaration could not erase the weeks that Zuko had spent stumbling on his own, helpless and wounded, but it did ease some of the hurt in his chest. It did push back some of that gnawing emptiness. Well, it was a start. Zuko closed his eyes and relaxed into his uncle's embrace. Maybe he was being weak. Maybe it was foolish to even dare to hope that he could trust this man again. Zuko couldn't bring himself to care. He was tired and drained, so terribly sick of struggling on his own. In that moment, he just wanted to forget. He just wanted to believe. Oh. The tears had completely dried on Zuko's face by the time Iroh left the abandoned house. His uncle had been intuitive enough to understand that Zuko needed time to digest all they had discussed, and there was indeed much to think about. Iroh had waited until Zuko had calmed down before broaching the topic of what they were going to do next. He'd pointed out that they couldn't stay in Tuzan with Azula and her forces nearby, and it seemed that the ostrich horse that Zuko had been riding had fled during the battle with Azula. No wonder he had been unable to find it when he'd explored the village. Zuko frowned and rested his chin on his knees. He still felt a bit sad to think that the ostrich horse had vanished. The feathered creature had been his only companion for quite some time after he'd left the Avatar's group, and though he'd never given it a name, he'd still liked the animal. He hoped that the ostrich horse found a new owner or a nice place to live. Perhaps it would even return to the crazy cabbage merchant. In any case, the loss of the ostrich horse now left him and his uncle with no means of transportation aside from their own 2 legs. Zuko had not wanted to consider the offer the Avatar had shyly given him, but his uncle had made it quite clear that it would be foolish to dismiss the use of the air bison. The Earth Kingdom was huge, and the most important thing for the 2 of them right now was to get somewhere safe and far away from Azula. They could figure out a more specific plan after that. Even Zuko couldn't argue with the logic, knowing that neither he nor his uncle were in any condition to be fighting. Zuko couldn't bend, and Iroh was still recovering from his lightning injury. That was the other issue troubling Zuko, his healing abilities and the effects it had on his chi. He'd learned that people like him had used to be called the children of the Undying Fire. Unfortunately, the only other information Zuko had got was that his powers were rare and dangerous and that the Fire Nation had tried to wipe out all of the fire healers. It was frustrating. Zuko wished he could learn more or at least figure out a way to control the ability. He didn't like to think about what would happen if he accidentally triggered his healing powers again. He'd already had 2 close calls. Maybe there is a way, he murmured. The world was vast. Surely there had to be another bender like him out there somewhere, or at least some kind of record to help him understand his strange abilities. He sighed and left the house, walking towards the campfire where the others had gathered. Iroh served a fresh batch of tea and chatted to Toph while Katara sat sipping her own tea with a pensive expression. Sokka had his head buried in a map, and Aang was leaning against Appa and playing with Momo, making bits of leaves and dust dance in the wind for the lemur to catch. It was the kind of scene that had been normal for Zuko when he had traveled with the group as Lee. Aang perked up as soon as he noticed him. "Zuko!" he exclaimed, letting the leaves fall to the ground and bolting to his feet. "How are you feeling? Your uncle said we shouldn't bother you for a while, but I thought you looked kind of upset when I was talking to you earlier, and then you didn't make a sound or come out of the house for so long after Iroh went to see you, and then I got worried and started to think that maybe you had left again and—" "Aang," Sokka said, raising his head from the map. "Breathe." Aang rubbed the base of his neck, looking a bit pink. Yeah. Sorry about that." He gave a sheepish grin. "I guess I got a little carried away." "A little?" Toph said with a snort. Aang's blush deepened, but he ignored her taunt and turned back to Zuko. "So, did you want anything to eat? Katara made rice and, I think we have some fruit somewhere." Zuko just stared at Aang for a second, caught off guard by the bombardment of cheeriness and concern. It was a bit much to deal with after the emotionally draining conversation he'd had with his uncle. Perhaps that was why he didn't respond in his usual contrary or dismissive way. Instead, he just shook his head. "I'm not Hun," he began, only to fall silent when a bowl of rice was shoved into his hands. He blinked and glanced down to see Katara standing next to him, not quite meeting his gaze. "You should eat something," she said, still looking anywhere but at his face. "You've barely eaten a thing today." Zuko didn't have the heart to refuse her when she was using her mum voice. It was a reminder of all the times she had tried to mother him and the group when he'd traveled with them as Lee. Plus, he really was too tired to put up a fight. So, instead of repeating that he wasn't hungry, he just nodded and accepted the bowl with a murmured thanks. Katara moved back to her seat without a word, though he noticed that she kept shooting him sidelong glances. In fact, all of the little group were giving him weird looks. "What?" he demanded after the 6th time he caught Aang staring at him. Aang blushed again and rubbed his bald head. Well, we were just wondering if you had decided what you're going to do next. Sokka and your uncle both agree that we shouldn't stay in this village another night, cause your sister and those girls are still out there and..." Zuko sighed as he realized this was going to be another convoluted speech. "Yes." Aang blinked. Yes. "Yes, my uncle and I will take you up on your offer." Zuko gave Aang a warning glare. "Just for practical reasons, of course. Don't go getting any ideas that this means I want to be your friend." Aang nodded and promised that he would be on his best behavior, but the jaw-splitting grin that stretched across his face belied his words. Zuko would have been more bothered by his enthusiasm had Uncle not chosen that moment to speak. "I'm glad you were able to put your pride behind you, nephew," Iroh said in a soft voice so that only Zuko could hear. "You've made the right decision. We'll be able to get to a safer area much faster using the Avatar's air bison." Zuko just made a non-committal sound. His thoughts had turned to more pressing matters. He stirred the rice around in his bowl with his chopsticks, his gaze distant and a frown tugging at his lips. "Uncle, you said you'd help me learn more about my healing abilities, right?" "Of course. Then do you have any idea where we could start?" Iroh stroked his beard. "The only records I've seen about the children of the Undying Fire were the ones I found in the palace archives, and I've already told you all the information I got from those." He thought to himself for a moment and then his eyes brightened as if he'd just had an epiphany. "There is one place that might be able to help us learn more about your abilities." Zuko leaned forward, oblivious to the 4 pairs of ears that were now listening in on the conversation. "Where?" "A library found in the Si Wong Desert." Some of the glow faded from Iroh's eyes. "I went there once after Lu Ten." He swallowed, not quite able to hide the flicker of pain that flashed across his expression. "Well, that doesn't matter now. What matters is that the library is full of ancient records that have been collected from all over the world. There is a good chance that we will be able to find something about the children of the Undying Fire if we go there." Sokka thrust his head between Iroh and Zuko, planting a hand on each of their shoulders. "Did you say a library that stores lots of ancient records?" Zuko's mouth twisted into a scowl. "Do you mind? This was a private conversation." "And now it's not," Sokka said before turning to Iroh with a grin. "So, the library." Iroh chuckled. "Very well, I shall share with you what I know. It's the least I can do in return for the assistance you and your friends have given us during these past 2 days. Zuko's scowl became even more pronounced. Exhausted or not, he did not like to be dismissed. He definitely did not like to have his conversations interrupted by presumptuous Water Tribe boys. Zuko opened his mouth to say as much, but then Momo chose that moment to come and land on his shoulder, chittering happily and offering him a half-bitten piece of fruit. A reluctant smile curved his lips. It was difficult to stay angry when confronted with those big, round eyes. "Hey there, little guy," he murmured, giving Momo a pat on his fuzzy head. "You can keep your fruit. I've got plenty of rice." Momo gave a lemur-like shrug and stuffed the rest of the fruit piece into his mouth. Zuko just shook his head in amusement and turned back to his uncle, listening as the old man told the tale of Wan Shi Tong's library and the knowledge seekers. It was a fantastical legend, but then Zuko had seen some rather fantastical things during his 16 years of life. In truth, he didn't care if the library had been originally built in the spirit world or not, he just hoped that it would give him the knowledge that he sought. The children of the undying fire. He needed to know what it meant. No matter what, he would uncover the truth. Chapter 18, The Library. The bird had a death sentence. Mai narrowed her eyes at her companion, which had been twittering and fluttering around her like some chirpy little shadow ever since she had freed it from the vines in which it had got tangled. This was why she hated acting on impulse. One moment of compassion and this was what she got for it, an irritating follower that wouldn't shut up. Mai directed her best glare at the little creature. Go away. The bird tilted its head and twittered something as if to ask why Mai was getting upset when they were having such a wonderful time together. Mai was reminded forcibly of Ty Lee. The realization made her sigh and pinch the bridge of her nose with her forefinger and thumb. There was something wrong with her if she had started comparing birds to her best friend. Although, the two did have the same obnoxious cheerfulness even in the face of a rising temper. Just because you remind me of Ty Lee does not mean I will go easy on you, Mai told the bird flatly. I will turn you into a pincushion if you keep following me. The bird did not seem bothered by her threat. It fluttered and twittered and hopped alongside Mai like a rubberoo with wings. She wasn't even sure what kind of bird it was. The thing itself was about the same size as a sparrowkeet. It had the usual claws and wings seen among its kind, but its plumage was a mixture of snowy white and dusky pink with a curling, silvery crown on its head. She supposed it was kind of pretty for a bird. Not that she would admit as much aloud. She wasn't some silly girl who cooed over feathers and colors. Should have left you in the vines, Mai muttered. Her new friend responded to that barb by fluttering into the air, albeit a bit haphazardly, and landed on her shoulder. Mai glared at the bird. The bird just chirped and nuzzled her chin in what could only be described as an affectionate gesture. 2 spots of pink bloomed on Mai's cheeks, though the color vanished an instant later. Think you're cute, huh? She said, narrowing her eyes. The bird chirped happily. Well, you won't be so cute when my senbon are sticking out of your chest. She flicked at the bird with her hand, making it squawk in surprise and retreat back to the ground. Learn to take a hint, already. Unfortunately, the bird did not take a hint. Instead, it kept following her like some loyal puma puppy, bright and chirpy and very, very annoying. Perhaps it had recognized that Mai's warnings were just empty threats. She'd never liked hurting animals, and she could tell by the way the bird kept shifting its left wing and from how it struggled to fly that it had already wounded itself while tangled in the vines. That said, if she were to be completely honest, the main reason she couldn't bring herself to use any real force to scare the bird away was because it really did remind her of Ty Lee. Stupid, chirpy, dusky pink thing. Mai clenched her jaw and kept walking. Time to focus. She was supposed to be looking for traces of their quarry, and spirits knew she was getting sick of this forest. She'd just ignore the bird and hope it would go away. It wasn't like it could keep up with her pace forever. Except the bird was just as stubborn as Ty Lee. It kept on following her even when the damage done to its fragile body began to take its toll. Mai tried not to notice how its hopping didn't seem quite so bouncy now or how the bird gradually began to lag behind, despite making a few desperate attempts to catch up to her by flying. Instead, she focused on searching the branches and ground for any strands of white fur that would suggest the avatar had been in the area. One of the soldiers had seen a large white thing in the sky earlier that might have been an air bison, and so a small group had been sent to investigate, including Mai. Except Mai had never cared much about the avatar, and the bird's chirps sounded more distressed than cheerful now. She could still hear it hopping tiredly behind her. She closed her eyes in a wince. She was so going to regret this. Fine, she said in her flattest, most unemotional voice. You can ride on my shoulder. For pragmatic reasons, of course. It wasn't like she had gone soft. She was just sick of listening to the bird staggering along with its pathetic little hops and weak twitters. Since it was so determined to follow her, she might as well spare herself that frustration. Or at least that was what she told herself when she stooped to pick up the exhausted creature. It nibbled gently on her finger, perhaps in gratitude. Mai frowned at the bird. Acting cute won't work on me. I thought I told you that before. The bird gave a tired chirp and nestled into her cupped hands, making itself comfortable. Mai felt something warm stir within her like a little ball of, well, something. She could feel the bird's tiny heart beating against her palm and its body felt so fragile and light. Suddenly, she was reminded of that night when she had held her baby brother for the first time. Little Tom Tom had been just like this, sleepy, fragile, and trusting with a newborn's innocence that she would keep him secure in her arms. Mai shook her head, snapping out of the memory. It wouldn't do to dwell on thoughts of her family, let alone the past. Thinking of Tom Tom just made her remember what had happened during that fight in Omashu. Or New Oze. Whatever. It still bothered Mai that she had been forced to refuse the trade for her brother all because Angela had wanted to play her little games. If the kidnapper had not been the Avatar and his friends, there was no saying what could have happened to Tom Tom. You know, we were the ones who took care of your little brother back in Omashu. Aang even made sure he got back to your parents safely after you and your friends tried to kill us. Mai's jaw tightened. The waterbender had made a valid point, and that was what was so bothersome about the situation. Despite the fact that Mai had broken the code of honor by turning on the Avatar and his friends during a truce, albeit at Angela's insistence, the Avatar had still returned Tom Tom to her family. He and his friends had not harmed Tom Tom at all. Hell, they'd even changed his diapers and fed him. In a fair world, that kind of selfless act would have deserved some recognition or at least a free pass from Mai to carry on their way without interference. However, because she had already agreed to help Angela, she was now stuck chasing the Avatar. Because she was stuck chasing the Avatar, she also had to inevitably fight said boy and his friends. And if what Angela had said the other day was true, it seems my brother has become a traitor to the Fire Nation. From what I saw today, he's sided with the Avatar. Mai closed her eyes. Zuko. She had tried so hard not to think about him. He was one of the few people who had managed to find a place in her carefully guarded heart. Well, at least he had done so when he had been a young boy, all awkward and shy. She didn't really know anything about Zuko now. He'd been gone for 3 years and she had not been allowed to communicate with him. The only thing she knew for certain was that he had not drowned like the rumors had stated. Instead, Zuko had returned from his watery grave to betray the Fire Nation and side with the Avatar. Or so Angela had claimed. It could be a lie, Mai said to the bird. Angela likes to twist the truth. Except Angela had not displayed the usual signs. No sharp little smiles, no cunning glint in her eyes. Just cold facts. Zuko had appeared, challenged his sister to a fight, protected the Avatar, and the Avatar had not hesitated to support him in return. Mai didn't know what to think. She didn't know what to feel. Had the prince she had once admired from afar in a palace garden changed so much? Had he really become an enemy to the Fire Nation? Something rustled in the bushes. Mai tensed, conscious that her hands were occupied with holding the bird. No time to put it down. No chance to grab her weapons. She'd just have to. Mai. Ty Lee's sing-song voice broke through the clearing like a burst of sunshine. She bounded out from the trees, grinning and holding strands of white fur in her hand. Mai just sighed, partly in relief but also in frustration that she had let Ty Lee sneak up on her in the first place. Such a lapse in concentration could not be forgiven. Her composure was slipping. It had been ever since she had found out that Zuko was alive, and she couldn't afford that. Not with Angela watching her so closely. I see you found some bits of that fluff ball, Mai said dryly. I guess the Avatar really is back on the move. Yup, Ty Lee said, shoving the fur into her pocket. Though I only found white hairs around that big grassy field. The trail doesn't seem to lead anywhere, and the other soldiers who were searching didn't find anything. Mai frowned. Perhaps the bison was just grazing in the area. Judging from what happened last time, it seems the Avatar has realized we've been tracking him using the fur. I doubt he'll make it easy for us to follow again. Ty Lee shrugged. She didn't seem overly concerned with the bison or the Avatar's whereabouts. Instead, she leaned forward with a grin and rested her chin on her hands. So, who's your new friend? What? Ty Lee pointed at the bird, which Mai was still holding. Little feathers there. Mai sighed and held the bird out to Ty Lee. Here. You can have it. Ah, but he looks so cozy. Ty Lee put her face up near the bird and made cooing noises. I wouldn't want to disturb the little guy. Mai raised her eyebrow. What makes you think it's a male? The eyes. Male paratus have black eyes while females have brown. See. Sure enough, the bird or paratu, as Ty Lee called it, had coal black eyes. Well, how about that? Mai had to admit that she was impressed. She had never known that Ty Lee knew so much about birds. Plus, Ty Lee said seriously, his aura is very male. On second thought, Ty Lee was still Ty Lee. Mai shoved the bird into Ty Lee's hands. Whatever. Let's just head back to camp. We need to report to Angela. Hey, wait. Mai strode away in long strides. Don't worry, little feathers. Mai might act all cold and distant, but she really does have a big heart. I think she likes you. I can hear you, Mai said flatly, making it clear she did not approve of this analysis. And you'd better do something about that bird. I don't think Angela will appreciate the addition of little feathers to her entourage. Ty Lee cocked her head to the side. You don't think so? You're kidding, right? You remember what she did to the turtle ducks, don't you? The turtle ducks had been Zuko's favorite animals at the palace. Mai remembered that he had often sat by the pond with his mother to toss them breadcrumbs. However, when Princess Ursa had gone missing, later presumed to be dead, Zuko had been left to feed them alone. Mai had always wanted to approach the withdrawn prince, to sit with him by the pond and toss breadcrumbs to the fuzzy creatures that he loved, if only to restore the smile which had used to stir her stomach with butterflies. But she had never been able to muster the courage. Then the Agni Kai happened and even Zuko was gone. So Mai had decided that she would care for the turtle ducks during his absence. It was the least she could do for the boy who had touched her heart. Except Angela had found her in the garden, and then Angela had then she had. What are you doing? Mai cried, standing up from where she had been kneeling next to the pond. She could feel her mask of dispassion cracking. Even her hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists in an attempt to still them. Angela lowered her hand, which still flickered with blue flames. Just cleaning up, she said coolly. There's no point keeping these useless creatures around now. My brother is never coming back. Mai closed her eyes, letting go of the memory. Angela had walked off without a word after that, but the smell of charred flesh had lingered. It was a scent that Mai had never been able to forget, nor the image of the blackened corpses floating on the pond. It seemed that Ty Lee had not forgotten the incident either. Some of the brightness faded from her eyes and her shoulders drooped. I guess you're right, Ty Lee said sadly. She rubbed the parrot's head with her finger. Sorry, little feathers. It looks like we can't take you back with us. Carefully, she placed the parrot on the ground. The bird ruffled its feathers and stared at Mai as if to ask why it couldn't come with them. Which was ridiculous. It was just a stupid bird. Just a stupid, far too trusting bird. Just like those turtle ducks. Mai turned her back on the bird. Let's go, Ty Lee. All right. Ty Lee said one final goodbye to little feathers before hurrying to catch up to Mai. She chatted about inconsequential things. Who did Mai think was the cutest soldier traveling with them, whether the cook would make custard buns again, what she would wish for if a genie appeared and granted them 3 wishes. Mai knew that Ty Lee was just trying to lighten the mood. It was easier to distract with cheerful conversation than to confront the real problem. They both were aware of how much each other disapproved of Angela's crueler moments. That neither of them was brave enough to stand up to the princess when it counted. A faint crease formed on Mai's brow. Yes, Angela could be cruel to a fault, but there was also a reason the 3 girls had become friends. Maybe that was why Mai still wondered about why Angela had chosen to kill the turtle ducks all those years ago. Had she done it out of spite because the birds were Zuko's favorite and Mai had chosen to feed them? Or was it because the turtle ducks were just a constant reminder that the big brother with whom Angela had spent her childhood, the same brother she had mocked but also forced to play with her, had left her all alone? My brother is never coming back. Angela always smiled when she was being cruel. She had not smiled that day. Oh. The sun was warm on his back. Zuko laughed and glanced at his sister, sand flicking up everywhere as the two of them ran from the waves that threatened to sneak around their ankles. Angela's grin was so wide he could see the gaps where her teeth had yet to come through to complete her smile. Of course, that was when she decided to push him into the salty water. Zuko fell on his rear with a yelp. The wave doused him in a cold rush, leaving bits of seaweed on his hair. Angela took one look at him and clamped her hand over her mouth. She struggled to maintain her composure, but then the first giggle escaped, followed by another and another. His cheeks burned pink and he clenched his hands into fists. Angela was so happy in that moment. His frustration faded in an instant. A second later even he was laughing. He probably did look funny with seaweed stuck in his hair. That didn't stop him from getting some payback, though. One quick lunge had him grabbing the hem of her dress and then he pulled her into the water with him. Shrieks and giggles followed, mixed in with a lot of splashing. It was only Shizue's cry of dismay that had the siblings desisting in their mission to get the other as soaked and dirty as possible. "Look at you two," Shizue said, planting her hands on her hips. "You're all covered in sand and you're drenched to the skin. What am I going to do with you?" "What to do with them indeed," a voice said from behind the lady-in-waiting. It was their mother. Zuko scrambled to his feet, apologies already gathering on the tip of his tongue. Angela, on the other hand, stood there with all the cold dignity a 3-year-old princess could muster, as if she did not have splatters of sand stuck to her cheek or, indeed, had done anything wrong. Mum bent down so that she was at eye level with her children. "Well, since you're already wet, you might as well enjoy yourselves." Then she winked. Zuko grinned. His mum was the best. Even Angela softened out of her dignified princess act. She tugged on Zuko's hand and demanded that he come play chase the waves with her again. That was when Zuko noticed their father watching the two of them from farther up the beach. Prince Oze's long black hair hung loose and he was wearing his casual robes, typical for vacationing on Ember Island. He was also smiling. Zuko's eyes snapped open. A cloud-speckled sky gazed back at him. No waves, no sand. Just the wind brushing his face and there was something warm pressing against his cheek. The warm thing moved. Ah, that was his uncle's shoulder. Right. He must have dozed off at some point. Now that he actually took in his surroundings, he realized that he was still sitting in the bison's saddle-like basket, squashed between his uncle and Toph. The landscape below them was a rolling mess of dunes, stretching all the way to the horizon. Only their guide's white-sailed boat disrupted the endless ocean of sand. "Did you have a nice nap?" Zuko stared into the distance, making no motion to respond to his uncle's question. In truth, he didn't know what to say. The dream was still vivid in his mind. He could almost smell the salt spray of the sea and hear Angela's gleeful shrieks and giggles as the siblings chased each other round and round. It hurt to think of how happy he had looked. It really hurt. He didn't need his growing headache to tell him that he had recovered a memory from his childhood. The ache in his heart was undeniable. It whispered that what he had seen was real. If his family could be cruel and ugly, there was also another side to the coin. It was a side that had manifested itself on the golden beaches of Ember Island, and it was probably what had fueled his desire to return home while he had been banished. Cherished memories. Tender memories. He could see how he must have clung to them like a drowning man. Maybe that's why reliving the memories now just left a bitter taste. His family had been happy once. How had it gone so wrong? "Zuko." Iroh touched his arm. "Are you all right?" Zuko shook his head, more in a gesture to say he didn't want to talk about it than a confirmation that something was troubling him. He could sense rather than see that the Avatar and his group of friends were watching. Even the lemur. There was no way he was going to spill his heart in front of them. Plus, he just didn't want to deal with the confusion that came with trying to sort through his memories. Picking at his past was like picking at a barely healed scab. It opened fresh wounds. Better to focus on the now. Better to focus on discovering the truth about his healing abilities. "It's nothing," he said firmly. Iroh still looked concerned, but Zuko wasn't going to give his uncle a chance to start poking and prodding to get the truth out of him. Instead, he asked how far they had to go before they reached Wan Shi Tong's library. Sokka glanced up from the Earth Kingdom map he had been reading. "I've been trying to figure that out," he said, and pointed to the line he had drawn on the map from the Misty Palms Oasis to a spot in the far center of the Si Wang Desert. "Iroh, you said the library is somewhere around this area, right?" Iroh spread his hands in a helpless gesture. "I do recall it being in the central area of the desert, however, it has been many years since I made my journey and there were quite a few things on my mind during that time. I honestly could not tell you how I got to the library. Back then, I also relied on a guide." Zuko's eyes narrowed. "Then how do we know we're even going in the right direction?" "Those guys you made us hire," he gestured towards the boat-like thing they were following, which was being propelled along the dunes with great gusts of sand, "could be leading us back to their hideout only to betray us." "I hate to say it, but Zuko has a point," Sokka said. "I mean, I know that old man you played Paisho with vouched for the sandbenders being able to help us and all, but they're not exactly the friendliest-looking bunch." He shuddered, perhaps remembering the rotten-toothed smile one of the sandbenders had given him. Iroh chuckled. "Appearances can be deceiving. Wolf bats can appear as koala sheep and koala sheep can appear as wolf bats. What matters is that we must learn to discern the truth for ourselves." There was an awkward silence. "Does he always talk like that?" Sokka muttered, leaning towards Zuko. Zuko rolled his eyes. "You have no idea." His uncle was forever speaking in proverbs. Zuko was pretty sure that Iroh did it on purpose just to sound wiser. Or maybe it was an old man thing in general, as if growing a beard and some gray hairs meant you could no longer speak plainly. That ancient relic his uncle had befriended while playing Paisho at the Misty Palms Oasis had been cryptic as well. Something about white lotuses and doors opening. Whatever. Zuko started at Topha's voice. It was unnerving that she had vocalized exactly what he had been thinking, though her reasons for sounding unimpressed were different. It seemed that she did not understand what was so special about Wan Shi Tong's library or why they had to go through all of this trouble just to visit the place. If she had her way, they would have never entered the Si Wang sandpit. Sokka gasped theatrically. "Are you kidding? It's an ancient library brought back from the spirit world and is probably filled with thousands of books and scrolls. We're bound to get some intelligence on the Phi," he flushed, avoiding Zuko and Iroh's gaze. "I mean, we're bound to find some useful information there." Zuko's eyes narrowed. Sokka pointedly looked anywhere but at him. More and more suspicious. Toph wriggled her toes to get rid of some of the sand that had got stuck between them. "Well, you guys have fun with that. You're not going to come with us to the library?" Katara asked. Topha's voice became even more sarcastic. "I've held books and scrolls before. I gotta tell you, they don't exactly do it for me." There was another awkward pause as everyone took in Topha's vacant stare and milky green eyes. "Right," Katara said, going a bit pink in her cheeks. "Sorry." Toph just went back to wriggling her toes. Obviously, she was used to her traveling companions forgetting that she was blind. "Anyway," Sokka said, pulling the conversation back to the matter at hand. "As Zuko was saying, how do we know that we can really trust these sandbender guys?" "I guess we just have faith," Aang piped up from where he sat perched on the front of the basket. "The sandbenders know the desert better than anyone, right? Sure, that means they could betray us if they lead us to their hideout and surround us or something." He shrugged. "But it also means they're in the best position to help. Right now, I want to believe that they're the real koala sheep." Iroh smiled. "Well said, Avatar." Zuko's brow creased. He didn't know why his uncle sounded so pleased. That kind of speech was typical from the Avatar. The airhead always wanted to see the good in everyone. "Even you," a small voice in his mind reminded, "and that was after you had threatened him and tried to capture him." "Shut up," Zuko told the voice. Sokka frowned and folded up the map. "Well, it's too late for us to turn back now anyway. We're here, so I guess we'll just have to trust that the sandbenders are taking us in the right direction." "Indeed," Iroh agreed. "And if they try to pull anything funny, I can always bust some heads with my bending," Toph said cheerfully. Zuko stared at the small girl seated next to him. Her lips were curved into a bloodthirsty smile, suggesting that she would take great pleasure in busting said heads. Creepy. He made a mental note not to underestimate her or to get on her bad side. That smile reminded him way too much of Angela. Hey, the sand sailor has stopped. Aang exclaimed. Katar appeared over the edge of the saddle. I thought the library was supposed to be a huge, ornate building. I don't see anything but sand. Iroh chuckled. No, this is the place. He pointed to where a spire was sticking out from the sand. Right there is where you'll find Wan Shi Tong's library. Zuko stared at his uncle. But that means it's completely buried, Sokka finished with a sigh. Great. Our big source of intelligence is full of sand. Iroh's mouth twitched into a smile. Have some faith in this old man. The library is still accessible. Zuko didn't see how that would be possible, but when Appa landed next to the spire and they all clambered off the basket, Toph confirmed that there was a massive building underground and all of its passages were intact and free of sand. He couldn't help but sigh in relief. For a horrible moment, he'd thought that they had come all this way for nothing. Now that he knew they could actually get inside, he found himself itching to get moving. All of the answers he sought about his healing abilities could be inside that library. It was a terrifying but also relieving thought. Iroh had a brief conversation with the sandbenders and then gestured for the others to follow him towards the tower-like structure jutting up from the sand. True to her word, Toph chose not to come with them and claimed that she would keep an eye on the koala sheep. She plunked herself on the ground next to Appa and made a shooing motion with her hands. No one needed to be told twice. All of them were just as curious to see inside the Library of Legend, though Iroh seemed more resigned when they climbed through the open window and began descending the rope into the library. Zuko's eyes widened when his feet touched the floor and he was able to take in the inside of the building for the first time. He was standing on a bridge. Pillars and stone arches seemed to go on for miles, connecting with a web-like maze of corridors and rooms that were filled with rows upon rows of bookshelves. The vastness was overwhelming even for a prince like him who had grown up in the Fire Nation palace. Perhaps it was because there was something spirit-touched about the library. A shiver crept down his spine as he looked into the abyss that spanned either side of the bridge. Combined with the ghostly light of the lamps, he could believe that falling into that bottomless darkness would lead him straight to the spirit world. There was a soft, rustling sound from behind the group. Feathers caressing against feathers. Zuko unsheathed his swords and spun around, preparing to defend or attack if needed. He froze when he saw a giant owl step out through the stone archway. If his uncle's story was true, this was surely Wan Shi Tong. Zuko swallowed. Somehow, he didn't think his swords would be very good against a spirit. He really missed being able to use his bending. Hopefully, the owl would be friendly. The owl was not friendly. Wan Shi Tong had developed a disliking for humans over the years and ordered them to leave unless they wanted to become stuffed heads on his display wall. Humans were prohibited from using the library. No exceptions. Zuko would have lost his temper. He was not about to let some overgrown owl stop him from getting the knowledge he needed, but then his uncle stepped forward and tried to reason with the owl. Upon some probing, they managed to learn that a firebender had come to the library a few years ago with the intent of finding out a means to destroy his enemy. Sokka got a guilty expression on his face after that comment, but Zuko barely noticed. He was too busy fuming over the fact that they were right there and he wasn't able to pick up so much as one book. I don't care about any of that. Zuko shouted, slashing his hand through the air. I just want to find out the truth about my bending. I know you have information on fire healers in here somewhere. Wan Shi Tong extended his long neck, looming forward like something from a nightmare as he placed his face right up next to Zuko's. Zuko resisted the urge to step back. It was unnerving to be confronted with those timeless eyes at such close proximity. Interesting, Wan Shi Tong said, eyeing Zuko up and down. Very interesting. I thought the humans had destroyed your kind. Zuko swallowed. What? The owl just gave a faint smile and then pulled his face back. Very well, he said, speaking to the group as a whole, I'll let you peruse my vast collection, but on one condition. To prove your worth as scholars, you have to contribute some worthwhile knowledge. Once this requirement was satisfied, Zuko and Iroh separated from the Avatar's group and made their way deeper into the web of rooms. It didn't take Zuko long to find the section dedicated to the Fire Nation and its history. Unfortunately, every book, scroll and shelf had been burnt to ashes. There was nothing left. No information about fire healing. No explanation for why the royal family had sworn an oath to kill the children of the Undying Fire. No, Zuko said, collapsing to his knees. This can't be. Iroh placed his hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, nephew. It was not like this when I came here last. However, the library is vast. Perhaps we can still find some information on your healing abilities. I believe there is a section on bending. We might have luck there. Yeah, Zuko said, getting to his feet. And if that failed, he was going to corner that overgrown owl and force Wan Shi Tong to talk, spirit or not. It was clear that Wan Shi Tong knew something. Zuko wasn't about to give up just yet. Check the description for the links to the author.